Call the meeting to order. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to the August 3rd, 2021 Post Falls City Council meeting. Hard to believe we are in August already. Shannon, please note that all council members are present with the exception of Councilor Thorson, who is excused tonight. Under announcements, we do have a few. The annual community picnic is this Thursday, August 5th, starting at 5 p.m. at Camellan Park Pavilion. Come enjoy a free concert by Devin Wade. There will also be a barbecue and a beer garden available for purchase. Thank you to the Post Falls community volunteers for putting this event on every year. Toy Story 4 will be playing at Tullamore Park next Friday, August 13th. Bring your blankets and chairs and enjoy a movie under the stars. The movie will start at sunset. And I wanted to read a letter that we had received from Bob and Wendy Veal. It says, Dear Mayor Jacobson, we just wanted to express our thanks for the prompt response and attention from John Beecham and his staff when I called regarding the watering system on the hill above Sterling Drive going up to the Highlands Golf Course. The system had not been working, and being new to the neighborhood, I had not remembered it existed until well into the hot weather. John sent someone up to the area, and I happened to see him walking the hilltop next to our home the day after I called. He was most personable and explained that it appeared the controller was broken. The next morning, everything was then working fine. The hill is a large area of dry, fire-ready trees and undergrowth, so we are most happy to have the system working again. We appreciate such prompt service. So, John, thank you. Please pass that on to your staff as well. And we appreciate citizens letting us know when they see something that is broken like that so we can get it taken care of. Are there any amendments to the agenda?
There are none tonight, sir.
Any declarations of conflict or ex parte contacts and site visits? Seeing none, would you please present the consent calendar?
Item A is minutes from the July 6th, 2021 City Council meeting. Item B is minutes from the July 20th, 2021 City Council meeting. Item C is payables July 13th through July 26th, 2021. Item D is Wallace Thorington Minor Subdivision Construction Improvement Agreement. Item E is Nicholson Commercial Center Subdivision Construction Improvement Agreement. Item F is Sanitary Sewer and Water Easement Acceptance, Spencer Place Apartments. Item G is Nicholson Commercial Center Subdivision Master Development Agreement. Item H is Tullamore 9th Subdivision Master Development Agreement. Item I is Jacqueline Riverbend Annexation Reasoned Decision. Item J is Teton Meadows Master Development Agreement. And item K is request to ratify the order of 2 new 2021 Chevrolet 6500 work trucks.
Any questions on the consent calendar?
I'd move to approve the consent calendar as presented.
Second. Motion seconds. Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Wilhelm.
Aye.
Malloy.
Aye.
Wolf.
Aye.
Borders.
Aye.
Anthony.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Tonight we do have 2 public hearings, and if anybody wishes to speak on either the Green Meadow zone change or the zone code update, we ask that you fill out the form on the podium in the back and turn it in to Shannon, our clerk. And with that, I will open the first item, the Green Meadows zone change.
Good evening, Mayor Jacobson, Council President Wilhelm, and other members of City Council. John Manley, the planning manager here, to introduce the Green Meadows zone change, file number the RZNE 4 2021. Applicant is Olson Engineering, with the owner being River City Properties, LLC. The request is to rezone approximately 1 acre of the what's currently R2 medium density zone property for the requested CCS Community Commercial Service Zoning District. This was recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission on May 11th for the requested zoning district of CCS. Location is, as you see here, the area we had at the time was, a large field, undeveloped ag land. It's halfway between Greens Ferry and Cecil. You'll see that more clear in some upcoming slides. The water provider would be Ross Point Water District, with the City of Post Falls providing sewer. Here's where you see the Greens Ferry and Cecil off to the east. Most of these roads now have currently been developed, and some portions have been platted and are receiving permits in them. What you see in the white is predominantly the R2 area. This map here is to depict the area of, it's currently CCS. What they're requesting is to reciprocate that on the west side of the existing CCS for about an acre of land. Staff would see the request as being compatible with some of the adjacent infrastructure, which I'll go into on some next slides. Additionally, would like to note that commercial at this location would be considered more of a safer development pattern than what was previously established with the R2, as you would prevent as many egresses onto that corridor. So you'd only end up with less egresses. So looking at the zone change criteria, you'd be finding, is it in accordance to the comp plan? Is it also in accordance to the comp plan goals and policies found in that plan? We'll be looking at items like street classifications, traffic patterns, existing development, future land uses, and community plans. And is there any other geographic or natural features that would prove incompatibility with the request? The staff goes into great lengths at the street classifications and traffic patterns and its compatibility. There is no community plan for this, and there was no known geographic or natural features. Looking at the future land use element of this, you see the area around this is what's considered transitional. The purpose of the transitional in the comp plan is many areas around the periphery, depending on the location, has different needs about that, and we didn't know exactly what those needs would be. So we created sub areas, which the next slide goes into that. Here's where you see the R2 and that request with the R2 zone. Going into the purpose of the transitional, looking for areas designed for suitable growth. We look at these principles. The main ones here that are highlighted is within the 41 North area, focus provision for multifamily commercial and tech uses near higher classified roadways. Prairie Avenue would be a higher classified roadway, so the CCS would be compatible with that, as well as the next one. You do have more than 4,000 vehicle trips per day, so it would also be compatible with that element of it. Some of the comp plan policies or goals: grow and sustain a balanced, resilient economy for Post Falls, providing community prosperity and fiscal health. The next one looks for different types of and quantities of land uses to meet the city's long-term needs for sustainability. One of the main principles of this comp plan update was, you can see that throughout all the goals and policies, is creating a work, live, connected community with pedestrian connections to areas of employment or commerce. The proposed plan does have that commercial along to the north, which the residents could walk to. Looking at a policy here to support that overall vision is maintain and enhance community level of service. This is done through impact fees, so when building permits are issued, that goes towards public safety, streets, and parks. They use those fees as upon issuance to pay for that. So the residents, those are parks paid through the residents, commercial pays the public safety and streets portions. Foster a long-term fiscal health of the community, provide opportunity for services within walking distance. That's what that commercial would do for those areas, those residents that live south of Prairie between both Greens Ferry and Cecil, of which should enhance those residents' quality of life. There's an overview of the proposal again. The other policy, which is very similar to the other one, is applying the zoning designation, looking at the future land use mapping, which I've gone over, looking at the compatibility of the land uses. Staff wouldn't view the commercial in close proximity to residents along a major road as being incompatible. In our zoning districts, we do have buffering requirements. So for those commercial developments that are adjacent to residential, they would be applying an appropriate buffer to mitigate the non-compatibility. Looking at the infrastructure and service plans and traffic patterns, once again, the staff report talked about the compatibility of that. The other one, goals and policies of comprehensive plans, master plans, facility plans. The staff report also talked about the compatibility of those. Looking at the other zone change criteria, looking at commercial and high density, typically assigned along streets with higher road classifications, this is the case with Prairie Avenue. Limited neighborhood commercial or lower density residential zoning is typically assigned for properties as they proceed farther away from intense urban activity. So this area isn't necessarily on Highway 41, but in time, Prairie Avenue is going to be a fairly busy road, and you're going to see the evolution of various commercial along Prairie Avenue. So although it does also meet for low density, it's also compatible for the request for some commercial as well, being the fact that it's compatible with the transitional tenants and the 41 North principles. The next one, industrial zoning, they're not requesting, so that wouldn't be applicable. Here's the agencies that were notified. Here's the responses. Post Falls Police Department commented as neutral. Fire District said it's within their boundary and they could service it. Highway District had no comment, with the Department of Environmental Quality having more construction-related matters to be handled at time of construction. Any questions? for
Questions,
staff?
John? Al, go ahead.
John, I guess I'm curious kind of how we got here. You said it would be safer to not have those houses, which I don't disagree with that. But is that road between the two reds, is that constructed? Is that done? Is that?
I haven't driven out there recently. I do know most these roads internally I've seen paved in the last time I was down. Whether that connection from here to here, I do not know for sure yet at this point. But
I guess maybe my question more clear is, does that road have to be there, or is that road going to be there?
It will be
Or
there.
could that road go away? Could the road go away if we approve this zone change?
I may ask Jim if he knows whether that road's been placed in or not.
So at this
Jim,
time,
please, Jim, would you come up to Mike?
Jim O'Callaghan, staff engineer. So at this time, that is the design road that has been approved that is going to go in. They do have it, I believe, ready to be paved, if not paved at this point.
That's not where the status of the road isn't important to me. The status, or the question is, if we vote to change this, could that road then be vacated so that now you've got one huge, big piece of commercial?
Due to
CCS.
emergency services, I would say no.
Okay. Oh,
Good.
one other question on that. Goes back to kind of like how we got here, but I don't think this is a road question, Jim. But now we're looking at this and somebody's saying, I guess the landowner's saying, we don't want people pulling out from a duplex onto that street. How'd we get here?
So the landowner's not saying it, it's more of a staff recognition that this proposal is a improved proposal than the other one. The applicant is, from what I understand, is desiring to consolidate this and to complement the commercial to the east after they had already received their R2 approval.
Okay. One more thing. Multifamily is not permitted outright in CCS, correct?
That is correct.
But it could be done with a special use permit.
That would be true.
But that would have to come back to us for approval, or is that staff?
Special
level?
use permit would go before the Planning and Zoning Commission, of which I would state multifamily at that location more than likely would be better than those other R2 lots, as you would have less egresses and once again less conflict. And we have buffering requirements we currently have in the code of 15 feet that you would then space between multifamily and the lesser dense product.
Is there any way, since they're not asking for multifamily on there now, is there any way to restrict that in the future? So that a future council or planning and zoning commission wouldn't have that option? That it's commercial and,
Conditional zoning, and I'd let Warren.
I can speak to that. The quick answer is no. The council, a future council can always undo actions of a current council. Even if we put it into an agreement where they couldn't build on that today, a future council could amend the agreement and take that out. I mean, the fact that it requires a special use permit is probably the best assurance that you can get, and it leaves the flexibility for future decision makers to make a decision based on what's in the best interest of the community at that point in time.
Back to John. Can I
Go ahead.
one more quick question? So if that new piece were to be configured as multifamily, they come back to planning and zoning and say, you know what, we don't really want to put a strip mall there, we want to put, an apartment building there. How many units do you think could fit on 1 acre
Or,
with all the parking and everything?
well, the parking, it'd be up for the architect. Their max that they could get without density bonuses would be 18.
But with the parking and all the restrictions, 10, 12, you think?
Without having the question earlier, it'd be all just guessing.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you. Joe?
So you say that a commercial or even a high density would be a safer option because it limits the number of egresses on the road, but the absolute number of cars in and out, particularly the commercial, would increase dramatically, correct?
Well, the trips per unit is less than a single-family home. I think it's 7 for each multifamily unit, and it's 10. So net, that's probably true. But the increment is a little bit different between the two.
Okay.
All right. Steve?
So the houses then are those lots to the west of that, then they are zoned R1, or are they
They're-
zoned R2?
Sorry, they're zoned R2.
They're zoned R2 also, okay.
So technically speaking, as the code is today, they could have put multifamily on all those lots, or they could have bought a multitude of those lots and consolidated. They chose not to go that route, and they intend to construct single-family homes in the R2 zone, which is allowed.
Are any of those homes built at this point?
None that I know of on the north. I think most of the construction that you see out there is south of what you see in the white area and to the west.
So any of the potential buyers of the property to the west should be, could be, hopefully will be aware that would be, if this is approved, that would be a CCS zone.
Theoretically, that would be the case.
Okay. Any other questions, John? Does the applicant wish to speak?
I know there's someone from,
Don't see anybody.
see a rep from Olson here.
Okay. Any testimony?
We have none.
With that, I'll close the public hearing. Council, how would you like to act?
I guess my biggest concern was that if we change the zone on this, that the guy comes in and builds multifamily there. But I guess there's already multifamily there. It's duplex lots. So he could reconfigure it anyway. The only thing is that he could get more units on there if he comes back and asks for a special use permit. But quite frankly, I don't think he could really gain anything from doing that, so I was more concerned about the process down the road. Other than that, I wouldn't have any heartburn with it.
Yeah, I could put 12 units there by right as R2 anyway. And I wish I was a smarter civil engineer or architect, because you have to have more parking spots for more density. I guess I don't really understand the point, but I don't really see any huge drawback to it either, so it's not my property, so.
Yeah, unless you truly want to put commercial in.
Right.
Comments down here?
I agree with Joe. I don't see the drawback. He already has the right to build multifamily there. The owner is likely not going to gain any more units. I would think that somebody is actually going to build something commercial there. I would be in favor.
Lynn?
I think it's a good option for a neighborhood convenience area, so I would be in favor of it. I don't see anything wrong with it at this point.
Steve?
My biggest concern was the lots to the west of that, and if they were R1, it'd be a different story. They're already R2, so I think off of Prairie there, it probably makes sense to have it commercial, and where they haven't been built on or developed yet, that the buyer should be informed of what's going to be in his backyard.
Well, and it's,
They're going to be duplexes anyway, renters, but they'll.
to me, it's a little bit different because oftentimes we see people coming in asking for a special use or a zone change when people already own houses there. And so it's different than what they thought it was going to be. And now if there's no homes there, no duplexes built, and this has changed, then it's a matter of public record that it is zone commercial, so.
I would move to approve Green Meadows zone change, file number RZNE-0004-2021.
Second.
Motion second. Further discussion. Shannon, please take the roll.
Malloy,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Borders,
Aye.
Anthony,
Aye.
Wilhelm.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Next public hearing tonight is a zone code update. I'll open that public hearing.
Yes, zone code update, Title 18. So I am glad to be here at this point. I will say that. It's amazing, you start a housekeeping ordinance a year ago and it takes 12 months to get a zone code updated, or even to this point, to be presenting. Recently I did a comp plan update and it took, 2.5, 3 years. And you kind of wonder, what's up with that? And then you have a code update and it's taken 12 months. So some of these things, as you go through the process of drafting the code, doing the public process, it takes some time. Just wanted to make note of that. But the overall changes include, there's 2 slides here, is we're looking at a modification of the land use table, trying to address storage unit restrictions. I don't know if you drive around Post Falls, you see a lot of storage units popping up in some prime commercial areas. So coming up with some language to kind of preserve some of our commercial areas for more higher end commercial uses. Also, we've had some communication of people interested in the technology mix zone, and they desire some uses that weren't allowed, so we're proposing some additional uses. We're also looking at the bulk and placement table and removing multifamily as an option for R2. So it's more addresses that as a medium density housing product, be it single family or medium density, but in doing so also proposing reducing that single family lot size as an option. Remove single family from R3, once again zone with a purpose. If you have a high density zoned area and you place a single family home, you're maybe encouraging some non-compatibility down the road near some higher classified roadways. You look at our comp plan policies and we say we want multifamily, other polluting elements. Proposing clarifying in the base density of the land use table. When we do PUDs, sometimes it gets confusing, so addressing that a little bit. Swimming pool design standards. This was developed to kind of create some more flexibility in the setbacks and location of pools, which we'll go into. Modification of the ADU standards, trying to create some more flexibility and options for ADUs.
Would you explain ADUs for people?
Yeah, thank you. An ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. Oftentimes, it's a mother-in-law quarters, and I'll go into the details of that, but it's for another living unit on site with the primary residence. Require equipment screening and bike racks for commercial and industrial sites. We recently did this for multifamily, but as we're encouraging, once again, that work, live, play environment and people being able to commute to work with various options, and you see the bike lanes within the city of Post Falls, that adding this through commercial sites would seem as a benefit. Another issue that came up was people parking on open commercial lands for access to the river, and so provide some seasonal parking standards. We didn't have anything in place to address the matter, so as we were coordinating with code enforcement, some language would help staff and police department collaborate on an appropriate means to an end on those. Remove the requirement for landscape architect to design landscape plans and inspect and attaining C of O. This was in there, but it wasn't necessarily 100% kind of gone along. The reason why is when we had the recession in 2008-9, we had architects from outside the area. So, they may not even be in operation anymore. And so they're going to have to fly out, or we have to contact them, and someone can't get their CO because, a landscape architect is mitigating it. Oftentimes, we don't have a complicated landscape code either. It's just pretty much grass and trees. We have an urban forester. So what we would rely on is an urban forester to identify the trees and look at the landscape plan prior to CO. Most of your big commercial developments, they have a landscape architect anyways. It's usually your smaller local developers that it ends up harming. Adding additional language to buffer between multifamily and single family, exempting single family, two family, and three family dwellings, which I'll go into more details. And then adding some administrative exception language for neighborhood signs. That's an issue that came up on some subdivisions. They want to put up a sign. It was very restrictive. And then throughout the code update, you see some italicized words within the document. Those are now dovetailed into definitions tables, so you know that those words are defined and you can find them in the definitions table, so it adds some clarity there. Plus, we added some additional definitions. So I'm going to go through the code updates kind of from the lightest subject matters to the heaviest subject matters as we go through this. So the first one is the ADU. You can see here that we clarified it can be an attached or a detached ADU. So that way you can, it's not a duplex from planning purposes. It's an ADU that's attached to the house. Increasing the square footage from 40% to 50%, but making it more clear that it's no more than 1,000 square feet. The other language was a little confusing when it said whichever is greater. Kind of led you to believe that you could do 1,400 if you had a large enough house. Here's the swimming pool language. You know, we're looking at saying, okay, you can locate it on the side and the rear. Pools, filtration system, and other associated equipment must be located at least 5 feet from the property line. Pools must be located at least 6 feet from the main building of the site. Because pools are a permitted structure, oftentimes at the rear, we would apply a 10-foot rear setback. It oftentimes provided a negative impact for people desiring to put a pool in their rear yard. Storage units is, here we see that we're saying that if there would not be permitted on lots that have frontage on 41, Celtice Way, Mullen Avenue, and Prairie Avenue. So those would be the 4 corridors that if you have lots fronting, we'd rather not have storage units on it. What we did do in the land use table, we did offer a special use permit in the residential zoning district, though, for them to ask for a special use permit. Sometimes you have an R1 that's near a rail corridor, so instead of putting homes right on the rail, it may be an opportunity for individuals to put storage units near where people live, and they're not driving across town to their storage units. And so there may be times that it makes sense to put storage units not on a commercial corridor, but to mitigate the impacts of other elements.
John, can I ask a quick question on that one? What's the driving force behind that? Just the look of storage units or the amount of traffic in and out?
It's coupled by a little bit of the aesthetic appeal of a corridor. If like 41 was filled with storage units, that would be the corridor to Rathdrum storage unit corridor. The other one is just the economics, the tax increment the city gets. You have a costly infrastructure that goes up and down 41, or some of these corridors have some infrastructure that you would desire to have higher end commercials where you get higher tax return on that to help assist with those long-term obligations of that. So it's kind of coupled with those two items.
Okay, thank you.
Is that legal?
Sure. Yeah, the idea is that you can call out and say, we want these types of uses in this location, but not that location. The reasons for doing that, if it's a legislative decision, you're free to base that decision on essentially anything that you want. But making sure that you have sufficient tax revenue to offset the cost of maintaining that asset long-term, to me, that's a rational thing to base a decision on. It's one that I don't think there'd be any serious challenge to.
Steve, go ahead.
So right now on those corridors, we don't have anybody filling out an application or a land use plan to present storage units?
We do have giant storage that's going along 41. They don't have frontage, I don't believe, but anybody who had a permit, so anybody who applies for a permit prior to the adoption of this would be vested.
Okay.
Those, or a pre-existing site, they would have their established use. And so it's just no new sites along those corridors.
So anybody with an existing one would be grandfathered in, basically?
Yes. That's
Okay.
seasonal use parking or seasonal parking. So this one right here, kind of what brought this up was the Temple on site on the river annually. Well, since the 90s, they've been allowing individuals to park there. Well, in the 90s, Post Falls had a population of about, early 90s, probably less than 9,000. So the amount of cars that park down there versus the cars that park now here at 40+ thousand probably in Post Falls has increased. Well, the use was established as a pre-existing grandfathered kind of agreement that had been going on for some time. And just the amount of cars increased. So what this does, it establishes some parameters. So next summer, if they came forward and were doing this, they would have to operate on these rules. So these are new rules, so they would then apply for this seasonal parking permit application. And as you see here, what I highlighted were a couple items. Through the Planning and Zoning Commission, there was individuals who thought that the parking area at 10 feet was too close. You guys may have seen that too. So I highlighted at 10 as saying, you guys may want that to be 20 or 30. I'm not partial to any really particular number. This was more or less a draft to have dialogue on. The other one highlighted in yellow was brought up by the Planning and Zoning Commission of, because it wasn't identified before, was to have public restrooms a minimum distance from the property line. They established 10. I have received some individuals desiring that to be 20 or 30 or 25 feet. So that's another number that could be modified, and we could then bring an ordinance forward when we bring the actual ordinance with that modification. We are looking at operation hours between April 1st through October 31st. You'd be looking at dust abatement programs. You'd be looking at the last one, making sure that it could operate in a clean manner and not having weeds and whatnot. The tech uses that were mentioned, so the ones that we're proposing to be permitted outright would be food and beverage manufacturing, bakery product manufacturing, beverage product manufacturing, textiles, clothing, furniture, other related products, flat glass, or glassware products manufacturing. So staff felt like these types of uses didn't necessarily conflict with the tech mix type uses. The other one by special use permit, rubber products manufacturing or plastic product manufacturing, a special use permit. If you were like a secondary product and you were assembling rubber products, we didn't want to necessarily not allow them. But if, let's just say, they were creating the rubber product itself and creating plumes of toxins, maybe we wouldn't issue that special use permit and maybe it wouldn't be approved because of environmental reasons. The commercial industrial development standards, you see here, we're trying to address air conditioning, elevator overruns, heating, and ventilation units. I have an image coming up on the next slide, not the next one, but the following one. And the other one was the bike racks. And looking at other codes around the country, there's more restrictive, less restrictive. I kind of went in the middle here. Is one bike rack for every 5 parking stalls for commercial and one for every 10 parking stalls for industrial. That seemed to be a good median with a minimum of 2 for any establishment. And on that equipment screening. So what we're trying to screen is some of these AC units or these other apertures that kind of stick out and kind of aren't the most aesthetically pleasing. And when there's some fairly inexpensive ways to mitigate that through either extending some walls or some vegetation, just having some rules in place to have a cleaner, aesthetically looking commercial and industrial developments.
John, again, that would be for new?
New
products?
correct. New, or if there was significant additions, the new additions would probably need to meet the new code as well. Multifamily development standards. So currently we require 150 square feet for each 1 bedroom and 300 square feet for each 1+ bedroom. So with the desire to diversify the housing in Post Falls, one product that actually, you create code and you have a lot of times the best intent, then you go to implement it, and then you almost always have to tweak it a little bit after you adopt code or do some code updates. So here, the townhome product in particularly, because of how they get developed, we wanted to provide an exception. So if they were rear loaded and they were 12 units or less and they provided some patio, that they could get a 50% reduction in the open space. On a lot of these townhomes, they front either a public way, they are consolidated, and so creating like for a multifamily apartment complex, it's easy for them to come up with the green spaces and space it out. But if you're on Mullen Avenue and you buy some lots and you're fronting Mullen Avenue, you may not be able to meet the open space because you're in that lot and block formation. And so it's a housing need, but you can't facilitate it because of the open space. Bike racks we didn't have in the previous update. We went through the Planning and Zoning Commission. The original draft had one bike stall for every one unit, and it's been updated for one bike stall for every two units. So we updated it to the 2. Here's an example of those townhomes. You can kind of see here, you know, along this corridor. I believe this is a Greenstone product where they have some townhomes fronting where it transitions into some single family. Here's those open porches and balconies you see with those. And so a lot of times you end up having that right of way, which offers that kind of tough environment to create that open space as you wouldn't otherwise have that difficulty as mentioned. So we're proposing some buffering. So this is the existing buffering language. And if you notice here that it's multifamily development with structures 35 feet, above 35 feet, that's what it addresses, and it is adjacent to R1, R1S, R2, or SC3. So if you're in an SC4 or 5, this wouldn't count, or if you're below 35 feet, this wouldn't address it, but you would go to this table B. What staff's proposing is if you're less than 35 feet, but you're still multifamily, and or you're in the SC4 and you're putting in multifamily, that you would have to minimally use the A buffer. That's what the draft says. So you would put in the A buffer is 10 feet. Also, you have within that some deciduous trees and evergreen trees. When talking to the urban forester, that 10-foot treatment and that placement of those trees would make a fairly dense product over time. It wouldn't be year one, obviously, but give it 15, 20 years, you would see some screening of the impact of those developments to the adjacent. I provided a couple examples of this proposal. You see here, this is a current situation on Railroad Avenue where you have a multifamily project right along this single family. Here's you have the Railroad Avenue and you have a mix between duplex and single here. Applying the code, you would end up with a increased separation. You would end up with some trees that would go in between. Similarly, on this side, you'd end up with an increased green buffer on that side with an increased planting. You can see the deciduous tree in the back and the evergreen there. So that's what the difference between the two would be. You do see a skinny planting, but in talking to the urban forester, give that some time, even though that meets the code, that more than likely is not going to prove most beneficial for those trees. It's going to more than likely to be detrimental and be the demise of them. Here's another example. This is the most appropriate one I could see in our community. That's the buffer between the Life Care Center and Walmart. As far as the spacing of the trees, that's what it could look like down in time, the screening between, which doesn't exist now in code for that product. Any questions at this time before I get into the meaty stuff?
The 35 feet is important because a two-story house can be, what, 20-some feet?
You can get, well, it goes from the top of the roof. It doesn't go to the top of the,
You know, I mean, some of the situations we've had in the last few years where, you know, big apartment building looking over, you know, we're trying to fix that, right?
Correct.
That's the whole idea here. Where the 35 feet brings it down to a level, I mean, if it's below 35 feet, then it's not any bigger than a two-story house.
that would be correct.
Okay. So that's why it's a big deal.
Well, yeah, and that's what
You get over the 35 feet, that's when you got to put the buffer in and make some space.
Yeah, and then where it didn't apply, like I mentioned, was our current 35 feet and above addresses R1, R1S, and it didn't in the SE3. So in the downtown where we have SE4 and some of these apartments have gone up right next door, we didn't have code in place to deal with that matter. So what's being proposed is you would end up with a greater separation. I would say that with what we have in place, you probably, I can't say for sure, I know you wouldn't get a 12-plex for sure with what our new parking requirements are, but coupled with our parking requirements and now with we probably would have seen just, I'll go back to this one. This probably would have just been filled in with the same product all the way across. More than likely.
That's a problem.
Or it would have probably been like a 4-plex.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep, thank you.
So now onto the bulk and placement meaty conversation. So how we got here, rising home prices. We all know they've gone up. There's speculation that we're going to level off or maybe even decrease going forward, but the rate of it decreasing more likely won't assist the situation we're at. We also have discussed in the past the per capita income locally doesn't keep up with the rate of increase nationally. We've discussed through our workshop the limited housing choices. We either, I think the last public hearing said good luck finding one for $370 when I took this picture this year, but that is true. And so you're having $400,000 home or an apartment. We don't have a lot of choices in between. A lot of that came to just desire of consumers and product and deliveries. I got this from an email chain. I found it pretty riveting that in the 1970s you ended up with about 420,000 entry-level homes built every year. Now we're only getting 65,000. This is nationally. So you spread that out, we're not getting a lot of entry-level homes. The entry-level homes is how you can create that generational wealth. So in the 1970s, the individuals who bought were able to get that equity and move up through the housing chain. If we don't have that, then we're cutting off a whole generation in that equity. You look at apartment complexes, and they're full up. Good luck finding an apartment. I was talking with the Spencer Place Apartments and building those. They said they've been doing this. They build apartments nationally. They've never seen a lease-up rate as fast as Post Falls anywhere else they've ever built in the country. This kind of touches back to the higher rising cost of housing. Also says there's like 400,000 missing households for the 25 to 35-year-olds. So if we had the housing at the right range, they wouldn't be in apartments, they'd be in houses. Zoning district breakdown. So I want to get it out right now. This is not currently accurate. We've annexed the Land App site. We've annexed Pleasant View. The point of this slide is to say that as we look at these changes for the R2 and R3, it will affect a small percentage of Post Falls at this time. But in hopes, though, that if we do create product that then can be an example to create additional products going forward. And the reason being is you have these smaller homes. I actually rented this house here on the left. As I was going through different transitions, this allowed me to get into a house. So having this housing product in Post Falls provides a niche for people to then eventually get into a home. And they kind of look like this. A lot of them are fairly nice. They're smaller homes, less than 600 square feet, but they can provide a couple bedrooms, a bathroom, and a residence. Will they be produced? I don't know. You talk to developers, oftentimes the cost per square foot and the rising cost doesn't necessarily pencil for them. But if we provide a code that can allow for it, we reduce one hurdle. Zoning's no longer a hurdle, it's the cost of materials and labor. Cottages, they can come in different forms. You can do single family like this, preferably, with front porches. You can do them as common sites. A lot of times you do detached housing standards and detached product within site plans. Townhomes, I mentioned those. Those are a different product. You see, I believe this looks like a larger 2-unit or a 4-unit townhome. I can't tell. Here you have some 4-unit townhomes. Staff would encourage the rear loaded as you end up getting better view on the street. Some of the townhomes you see are front-loaded, all you see along the street is a bunch of garage doors. And that's why you saw that condition of being rear-loaded, is getting the density, getting that restriction is to encourage this type of product as an outcome. So here's that bulk and placement table here. We wanted to expand the housing options as discussed. We're also proposing in this to remove the minimum floor area in the table. The table would look much like this. You can see the floor area removed. The reason being for that is, once again, diversify the housing. Also, fair housing encourages zoning codes to not have a minimum, as it could prove to be discriminatory in nature because you're putting a minimum on that, preventing a cost threshold for a cohort or a group. The other one is the maximum dwelling units. You can derive that by the minimum lot. So if the minimum lot's this and you have 43,560 square feet an acre, math then becomes the minimum. Oftentimes these two conflict. You say this is your minimum, but math says this. And so that would be the proposal there. So what you would end up after this is, you can see here the R1 single family, the minimum lot width at 30 square feet with a minimum lot area of 3,000, and that's to facilitate that cottage home type product and the twin home type product, or not twin home, the tiny home.
John, I noticed that there's no RM on that.
No, the mixed zones are done differently than the other zoning districts a little bit in our Title 18, where you go to the technology mixed zone or the community commercial mixed zone or the residential mixed in the description, and a lot of the bulk and placement is baked into that descriptor of that.
Okay.
So
I noticed it wasn't there and wondered if it was someplace else.
it's because they're a little more squishy. They're not quite so, they're not as easy just to put into a bulk and placement table.
Gotcha.
And here's where you see the added note, and this came out of through the public process. There was concern like, well, what if you end up with a big sea of this and they're front loaded and we don't have on-street parking and safety for fire access and whatnot? Well, staff took that commentary in consideration and we're like, well, if you're less than 45 feet, we'll require your single-family home to be rear-loaded. That way you don't end up with garages on a street, reducing that availability of parking on street parking. The cars will be parking off the rear and people can park on the street.
But you are going to require garages? No.
Nope, just vehicular access to lots. So they could you're required to have 2 off-street parking stalls per unit. So you could have a carport off the rear or an open
Right.
parking pad. So the R2 modifications that you may not have seen that was caught through this process. The first one is, because we're getting rid of the multifamily, is section 2, the medium density residential. So we're just removing the multifamily wording. Similarly, through the public process, thankfully we got a good public comment that could address this. In limited commercial, people could ask for a special use permit it was medium or high density, so we got rid of the or high, so they could only accommodate medium density, and we got rid of the multifamily there. And this is just a couple examples of, this was a recent R2 approval at this location. This is an R1 lot. Currently, that's an unbuildable lot in R1. It doesn't meet our minimum standards, nor does it meet, it's not a platted. With this change, someone could utilize this alley and locate a cottage home on that lot. So it allows a residence near Mullen Avenue and to be infill. Similarly, instead of us forcing a 4-unit fourplex there, or a couple duplexes, someone could do 4 single-family detached product on that with this change. So it just adds another flexibility and options for housing. The remaining items that are in this code is, once again, the landscape architect stuff that I already talked about, the administrative exception for neighborhood signs for subdivisions, and the definition stuff. Any more questions for me on this?
Joe?
Just for clarity, none of the changes that I could find actually allow for any increased density over what's allowed in the current code, correct?
No. Well, not density, no. There is a little bit more of squishiness in the R2 as far as some smaller lots, but the density increase, no.
Right, it still remains 12 units per acre maximum, no matter what the lot size is.
Yeah,
correct?
just a medium, yeah, it's more, it's in still that medium density framework.
Right. Just wanted to make sure that I had that straight.
Not a question, but just a comment that I really, really appreciate all this work, because we've been working on this for, I mean, it's been discussed for several years, as long as I've been on the council, and, I mean, you've made changes over time, but, man, this is moving things forward a long way, so I know it took a lot of work, so thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no problem. And what's kind of frustrating for everybody involved is you permit a building circa 2018, and you may not see it constructed or see the results until 2020. And so, you know, you're seeing this development and you're like, wait a second, what are we doing? Well, it takes time for someone to pull a permit off the current code to see what the impacts are 2 years from now.
Steve Wade.
So if we approve this tonight, when would the changes take effect? Is there a 30-day waiting period, or?
So we would bring the ordinance back at a future council meeting, and it would be effective upon publication after the ordinance was adopted.
So I'm not sure, when we got this council packet on Friday, there's over 100 pages of things to go through. I was not able personally to be able to go through those in fine detail, and I know we had a workshop. I don't think part of these changes were covered in that workshop to the detail that the proposed changes are, so I'm not sure that I'm ready to say, let's go with this tonight. I don't know how we deal with that because we're in a public hearing, but
Well, we could table it.
Should we answer that question now? Should we take comments and then do it?
So I think you have at least one person who signed up to testify tonight. There may be others that I'm not aware of, but you do have some options. You could elect to move forward tonight. If you do that, what we're going to do is, by default, you're going to delay it because we still have to put together the final ordinance and bring it to you, so it wouldn't be adopted tonight regardless. If you wanted to continue the public hearing, you could do that. We would continue that out to pick a date, move it forward, bring it back for additional consideration on that date. If you wanted to do another workshop, we could close this hearing, have a workshop, and then come back and take action at that point. So you have a number of options.
I agree with Lynn to a certain extent. I mean, I read through this. We've been working on it for a while, but at the same time, I'm not in a huge rush. I'd rather we do it and do it right. If that means wait 2 weeks or even 30 days, whenever we can get it back on the docket, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I have several questions for John when he's finished too, Mayor. So I am sort of on the same page as Lynn is as well. I mean, I know we had a workshop on this, but this is a lot to absorb, especially just in a few days' time to have it all in front of us. So I don't know, but yeah, I mean.
And I'm good either way. I like, number one, as you said, it did not increase density. Number two, it provide additional buffering, address some of the issues we've had on the taller buildings. You're talking about trying to remove garage doors from the street. So I like the direction it's going, but I'm not going to get to vote tonight anyway. So it's whatever you guys want to do is fine by me. Steve.
I kind of agree with Lynn and Al right now that when we do pass this, get the ordinance, it's going to be in place for quite a while because it's taken a while to do this process. So I'm with the rest of the council members that I want to make sure everybody's 100% comfortable going into this.
Well, and it gives the public an
chance.
opportunity
Yeah.
to look it over too, and how it might impact or whether we came up short. I mean, even that question about 10 feet on the seasonal parking, I don't know. I'm not in an area where that impacts me, but it sounds right. But if somebody comes forward and says, wait a minute, we just heard about this, we'd rather be 20, I'd like to hear that, so.
So I would recommend, if that's the direction you're going, that we should take the public testimony of the person who signed up tonight, give them a chance to speak since they didn't come out tonight, and then we can go from there.
Okay, Jen? Thank you. Wishing to speak neutral, Mr. Burns. And you say suggestions and questions, so what I would suggest possibly is if we'll hear your testimony and then any questions. If we don't get them answered, provide them to the clerk and we'll get answers for you.
Thank you. Howard Burns, 502 South Rocky Point Court. First, thanks to Mr. Manley. I sent some questions in. He was kind, responded, listened to me, and I appreciate that. Unfortunately, once I got delving into this, I had more questions. So some thoughts, you folks are the ones that drive this, so here are some thoughts for you. First off, on the parking, if you envision yourself living in, I believe it's called River Place or whatever, and there's a big strip of land coming down by the Red Lion, I would want to see the restrooms and the trash at least 25 feet away from my property. I don't live there, but the restrooms and the trash should be at least 25 feet away. That's just my example of where I was going from. Regarding the PUD standards, I was unclear looking at the bulk table, so now the 5 per acre has gone away. So I would ask you to ask for an example, taking a contentious project such as the North Shore District and saying, how would this table have changed the decision-making process of staff for that project? Because of the way I read it, the only way you're going to know what the PUD density bonus is by having the developer do a conceptual plan, show how many true lots they could get there under the standard, and then say, now I'm asking for 10% more. They've got to do a conceptual plan to show that they can truly get X number of R1 lots. Because that was my contention in the North Shore project, that the guy could have only gotten 35 lots at best on that parcel. And yet he was standing by the...
I got to interrupt you, sorry. No offense, but that is scheduled for a public hearing before the city council coming up here shortly. So comments about that matter specifically are out of bounds tonight.
Okay.
And the information regarding that will have to come back at that hearing. Sorry to cut you off, but trying to preserve
North
that
Shore
record.
is, not North Place.
North Shore. So we're talking, are you talking North Shore or are you talking?
North Shore, yeah.
North Shore. So North Shore is coming back. So
Okay.
that one's the one that we got to tread lightly on.
Okay, fair enough. It was an example. That's the only reason I brought it up. In the CCM zone, the way I read the code, if I'm a developer and I have enough acreage, I can build multiple 105-foot-high buildings on the site, as long as I meet the setbacks. I can build multiple 105-foot-high buildings as long as I put non-residential use in the ground floor, and I have to have a development agreement, but there's no special hearings, nothing else. As long as I put non-residential use in the ground floor, I can build those buildings. And I would say to you that in any CCM zone, if over 10% of the property is going to be R3 use, or if any of the R3 buildings proposed for the CCM district were going to be over 35 feet in height, or any buildings over 45 feet in height, if there's an R-zone property next door, they should all go to a hearing in front of you folks. There should be a public hearing, because those are big things happening in the city. The CCM and the TM and the LC zones seem to allow high-density uses, but only a special permit and a development agreement. And development agreements are invisible to the public. You just approved a bunch of I have no idea what was in those development agreements. We're relying on staff and the fact that you guys, I guess, have looked at them. We're invisible. The public is invisible to the development agreement. So I find hearings really important, or at least posting up big notices, so you come back to the articles in the paper today on the dog park and people bitching about, excuse my French, notice. I come back to my previous comments before council. I think a 2 by 4 foot sign is really, really helpful. You won't have people saying, I didn't get noticed, because there's a big sign they can't ignore. I have some other comments in regards to the zoning table, which Mr. Manley said is now out of.
Our time's up, but
you took out 2 minutes for.
I'll give you a little bit of leniency, but if you don't get finished, submit it to the clerk, or your questions will get answers.
So I would ask that the table be updated in terms of the zoning percentages to reflect what the percentages are. Is it land area or parcels? And then to have it changed, okay, so if 15.5% is CCS zone, that is also 15.5% that can be R3. Because you can have R3 on CCS. So I think it needs to show what can happen in all of these zones. It can't stand on its own as though it's a commercial, CCS is a commercial zone, because it's not necessarily a commercial zone. Thanks.
Could I ask on that? I appreciate that, Mr. Burns, and as the mayor said, I would like to review this information in an email or something through Shannon or something
Instead of
like
email,
that.
though, please send it to Shannon. She can disperse it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So, do I table, do I close the public hearing
Continue.
to reopen, to continue it at a time certain, or?
So I think that kind of depends on what you all want to do. If you want to have time to review this and want to have another workshop, that's perfectly acceptable. I think we could wrap this up and have a second hearing if you wanted to do that. The options are yours.
2 weeks enough to review, ask questions?
I would move to continue this public hearing. Is that right?
Yeah, so the motion would be to continue the public hearing. What is the date of the next meeting? 17th?
17th.
Yeah.
So the
17th.
motion would be to continue this public hearing until August 17th.
Second.
Motion in several seconds. Further discussion? Shannon, please take the roll.
Wolf,
Aye.
Borders,
Aye.
Anthony,
Aye.
Wilhelm,
Aye.
Malloy.
Thank you. The public hearing is continued until August 17th. Thank you. Next item up tonight is the Singing Hills Parks improvements.
Mayor, members of the council, over the last few weeks, you've received public input both for and against a dog park. You have received a petition against the dog park, and you have seen the comments we collected at our on-site workshop. But this isn't just a dog park. It includes a lot of upgrades at Singing Hills Park that are piggybacked upon the development of a dog area. Singing Hills Park was one of the lowest scoring parks at the last, actually the last two master plans in their GRASP scoring of parks. For that reason, we wanted to see more than just adding an item, but looking at the whole area. I've been asked why now. It was listed as a shortcoming in our 2012 master plan and again in the 2020 master plan, along with several other items. I know splash pads as an example. We've made it through, we've added 3 splash pads. It's not that we ignored dog parks, we've been working on them. We've been looking at sites for quite a few years. The last 5 years, we've been looking at what we considered was one of the prime spots. We haven't given up on that prime spot, but we recognize that the last 5 years could be another 5 years, another 10 years, or maybe never happen. Went back to the Park and Rec Commission, discussed it, and they felt it was time to move on and not take just, settle for one item, but look at how we can meet that need. Told you it was more than just a dog park. I'm going to let Robbie talk a little bit about how we got here, what we designed, and some of the things we've looked at changing based on the input that we've received.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council, Robbie Quinn, Parks Planner. And as Dave mentioned, we're looking at the Singing Hills Park improvements. Just to go over a little bit about the park, 7.5 acres roughly, kind of central Post Falls, between Idaho, Syringa, and then Poline and 16th. So in the red is the outline of the park itself. And it's kind of broken into 2 areas, one being, or kind of two areas, are these linear open spaces with trails heading to Idaho, and then the other one heading south. And then the second area is more of the open field space with the playground and the parking, and also a trail. So that accounts for about 2.7 acres. The open trail space accounts for about 4.8 acres. So when we were looking at the dog park at this location, we looked at both options as far as including it in the open space and trails, or in this open kind of park area. And it was more appropriate to have it in the open park area, as there are a lot of connections and intersections along the open space corridor, as well as many residences backed up against those spaces. And as far as this open park space, it was flat, it had a playground, shelter, the parking already there, multi-use path, and some mature vegetation. So this was the original plan that we presented at the open house, as well as what I presented to you with JEB's contract. Just quickly go over kind of some of the elements. It had two dog areas. One was a 1 acre for what we were calling large dog, but small dogs could go in there as well. And then we had a 1/2 acre small dog area for the users who didn't want their smaller dogs with the larger dogs. So a total of 1.5 acres dedicated to the dog space. This also included playground renovation, new playground equipment, playground edging, ADA access, sidewalks, benches to the playground. We looked at renovating some of the parking and road access up towards the playground, which gave us an additional 9 parking stalls and relieved some of the unusable space with the large kind of cul-de-sac that is currently there. This allowed us to add ADA parking adjacent to the playground, as well as adjacent to the dog park entrance, so we could kind of separate some of those uses. So at the meeting, we received a lot of feedback, which is in the council packet, some of which we can't really change with design, but in attempts to address some of the items that we can change with design, we ended up reducing the dog park size to 1 acre, and this kept a 1/2 acre of open space for just for park users. Some of the comments were they didn't like the loss of their open space for throwing, frisbee or kicking the ball around. The dog park was too big, loss of soccer space, etc. There was also comments on they wanted a bigger playground, so we increased the playground size, added a shelter, which was another comment, and again, added all the same ADA, benches, site furnishings, etc. to that area. Additionally, there were some comments on wanting a larger buffer from some of the residences over here. So to do that, we kind of rerouted the fence a little bit, creating an extra 40 feet of buffer in which we would add a berm as well as some evergreen trees to help with screening. And then there were also comments, as far as splash pads, pickleball, basketball, for other desires. Again, the splash pads, we already have implemented 3 of those, and then pickleball and basketball take a larger space, and we had more comments just wanting to keep the open field space. And so with that, those are kind of some of the changes that we made based on some of the community feedback that we heard. And from here, we will open it back up to Dave.
Any questions, Robbie, first?
I don't know. Which one's, is Dave gonna do more of the presentation, or should I just ask Dave the questions?
We can do questions now, or we can do them at the end, but I did want to add a few things, but I also know that Councilor Anthony has been doing a little bit of research on it and talking to some people, so you wanted to share that
Steve, may I ask
information.
questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. I just wanted to let everybody know I did attend the dog park meeting that was held for the neighborhood and did listen to the concerns of the people. What Robbie and Dave have portrayed is fairly accurate on everything. That the concerns was the loss of open space and the entire park being a dog park at that time, besides the kids' playground. Since I was around the neighborhood, and they said a very nice young man had came to their door to sign a petition, and but he stated that the entire park was to be demolished and replaced by a dog park. And so I did ask him some questions if they were shown any schematic designs of the park, or told them that there would be open space for the kids. And so they said no, basically that they didn't know anything other than they were going to lose their whole park. And so a couple of them said if they'd had more information, they might not have signed the petition, but they said that basically the petition going around didn't give very many details to what the park would be on that, so.
With that, the discussion, I believe, is not whether or not we should have a dog park, but rather, is this the site for a dog park? Up front, it was not our first choice, as I indicated earlier. But we could not make any of those other areas work. And what you have before you is what we as professional staff, with the Park and Rec Commission's concurrence, is the most viable option. It is your decision on what you would like to do to upgrade Singing Hills Park, or have us go move on to other projects. Whichever you wish, we will carry out.
Oh.
And we're available for questions now.
So I never heard so much about a dog park till this first came up a couple weeks ago. I looked back in the master plan, and there was a section in there about a survey that was done. What does the community want? Dog park wasn't on there. So I hear a lot from some people that, oh yeah, we want a dog park, but it's not in the master plan. So that was concern number one. And then I guess I'm not a park planner, I'm not a professional, but I think in terms of two types of parks. One is like a neighborhood park. That's where I would classify this, completely surrounded by neighborhood. And the other is a destination park. Camelin's a destination park. Black Bay Park's destination park. Kiwanis, the Forest, these are all destination parks. These are places where people go to recreate. Whereas my mind is more about a neighborhood park should be what the neighbors want it to be. So I guess one of my questions is, those destination parks I just mentioned, Kiwanis, the Forest, Camelin, even Woodbridge to a certain extent, were those considered, and why were they kicked out as far as being a better place to have a dog park, a destination dog park, than Singing Hills?
Okay. Yes, they have been considered over time. We could look at, with Kiwanis, we do allow dogs on lead and through the trail system, but part of it has to do with the lease that we have with the Kiwanis. Camelin Park, it's a park that's overused already. So by going into there, we take away some other activity. We looked at Corbin Park. Once again, that means an impact into your disc golf, which is the only course we have, or the ball field or something else. The other side with that one, of course, is with the river and how fast it moves. I can see the headlines already with dogs going down the river, people chasing after. So we looked at some of those. The BLM land was discussed at one point. They went through a whole public hearing, and that's been going on for 4 years now. They're starting construction this year. Okay, we hope. But that was ruled out because of other desires within that access. So regional spots have been looked at. We give up something. If we went to one of the ball fields, we give up a ball field. We don't have excess space. That's probably the biggest issue in there. We do allow dogs on lead in a number of the parks, trying to meet some of those needs. So I guess that answers. As far as the surveys, Those are addendums. We can provide you with where they show up with the requests and everything else, but you're talking about hundreds of pages.
So Dave, I have the email that Robbie sent me in regard to the survey. Attached are the survey results. Page 42 and 44 show the dog park. As a park amenity, the results would show it as a top 3 amenity. Some of the items ahead of the dog park aren't park amenities, such as programming, desires, special events, festivals, and programs, and some are additional parks and parks facilities. As you can see, as a park amenity, dog parks are ahead of restrooms, picnic areas, lighting, splash pads, playgrounds, athletic fields, and athletic courts.
Good to know.
So there is a note in the master plan as well that refers to an addendum with some of that info.
But it's not just our area. This is actually something we see statewide. If you go to the State Park and Recreation Department, SCORP, which is the guide they do every 5 years, it covers not just state park stuff, but also municipal and county park. Number 3 on their list for the item that is unmet, as an unmet need within local municipalities, is a dog park. So,
More questions, though?
I guess more of a comment. I guess I'm back to what Steve was talking about, the misinformation that the people were provided. I guess, and I wish this would have been done. I was kind of surprised that this wasn't done ahead of time, where you did do kind of a survey, drop off a packet or a map, say, hey, this is what we're proposing for Singing Hills. What do you folks in the neighborhood think of this? I would really like to, maybe I'm going to hear all that. There's a lot of people here.
Public hearing.
Oh, it's not a
Not a
public
public
hearing.
hearing.
Okay. I guess I'd rather go back to that and say, how do the people that are going to be most impacted by this? Because if it's going to be a destination park, if we're going to add parking to it, that means we're going to be pulling people to it through this subdivision, this neighborhood, and I think it is going to have an impact. And I just wonder, you know, to Steve's point, we can't really go back to the petition because we don't know how it was worded, but I would like to hear how the public would weigh in on this.
With the design?
With the
Seeing
design,
what it
with the
was.
design. Hey, this is what we'd like to do at Singing Hills Park. What do you think? Thumbs up, thumbs down, neutral, whatever. I'd much rather do that than try to make the decision for them.
Okay. Linda?
Yeah, well, I would like to see from now on, when there's going to be a major modification to any city property, especially parks, that it come to a public hearing process. I went back and watched the Parks Commission meetings, and I felt like at our last council meeting, when I asked about this particular dog park, I felt what was said was, this has been in the works for years. Well, how I took that was that this particular property, this park, had been in the works for years. But when I went back through the record, that isn't true. It looks to me, and I could be mistaken, but I don't think I am, that the first mention of this that the public would have heard about is sometime in May at the Parks Commission meeting. And so I realize about the JUB's contract. It was also said at the time that we approved that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if we didn't use it there, that it could be moved someplace else. So I went around and looked at other dog parks in the area. I don't have a dog. I like dogs. I used to have dogs. But I don't have anything against dog parks. I just feel like, maybe a little bit like Counselor Wolf does, that this might have been handled a little differently. The dog parks that I went by today had no surrounding homes around them at all. And they were surrounded by streets only. The places where the dogs were were not grass. They were, at one time they were grass, but they weren't grass anymore. I mean, it was brown. It was nothing like Singing Hills Park looks like now. I personally don't feel like this is the place for it. I feel like we should have a destination dog park in Post Falls, but I feel like it should either be in a commercial zone. I know you don't have any of that property available right now. I think you were looking at the Yoke site, possibly out at Cecil. I just don't feel like this is the right place to put it. And that's just my thoughts.
Go.
I'm going to kind of echo, I get to say fewer words now because you said a lot of the stuff I was going to say, but I understand and I get what you guys are trying to do and really appreciate that there is a need for a dog park in Post Falls, and if we don't put it at Singing Hills, it may be another 5 or 10 years before there's another option. That said, the original plan is basically turning, 90% of Singing Hills into a dog park, and it's a nice plan. It's a nice looking dog park. I appreciate what you guys have done trying to take feedback from the public and step it back a little bit. But now we've got a half acre of open grass, which really isn't a lot to do much. And we've got a dog park that's not that great of a dog park anymore. So it'd be one of those compromises, I think, where nobody's happy. So at that point, I think it'd be better for the city to wait. We've gone forever without a dog park thus far. And find a piece of property that, as Linda said, is not completely surrounded by homes and smack in the middle of a neighborhood. Even if it's on the periphery of a neighborhood, on a corner lot or something like that, all the way on the outside would be more appropriate. I just don't think it's the right, it's the right plan, wrong place, and the compromise plan, I think, is even worse, even though I appreciate what you guys have tried to do.
Lynn, you have anything to add?
No, I'd echo Joe's comments. To me, it's just the wrong place. I like the plan. I think we can move that plan wherever we can get property, but I just think in this particular subdivision, it's the wrong place.
Steve?
The only comments is that if you see Northshire Park on Atlas, that is in a fairly residential neighborhood. There was some opposition to Central Bark on that, but I know we have quite a few Post Falls residents that go over and use that park regularly, that drive in to Coeur d'Alene. The other ones that are brown, that's probably the surface they put on them, purposely at Cherry Hill, at McEwen, those are that type of service. So just when I was out campaigning door to door, one of the #1 requests I got was for a dog park, wondering why Coeur d'Alene has some, Post Falls doesn't. And I think the Parks Department was trying to find a piece of property that they felt that was unutilized and to try to do something that would fit the neighborhood and fit the residents of Post Falls. So,
I'd weigh in. I've seen dog parks in residential areas, and they're a social gathering spot. That doesn't mean that all of them are going to be the same. It could work fine in one area. Again, the one I'm thinking of is right on the corner, and there's houses all around it, and people gather. But that doesn't mean it's going to work everywhere. And there is no grass, because dogs, when they run, tend to tear the grass up, especially the big ones. So it can be dusty, but if you maintain it, it can be done nicely. I've got a dog, I've got a big dog. And personally, I don't know if I would use a dog park. Fortunate, maybe I don't need to, but I like the idea of a dog park, and I have no personal preference where it goes. So I would defer to council. Like I say, I'm not going to get to vote on anything tonight anyway, but I would defer to council. I think a dog park would be nice, but personally, again, if we don't have one, that's all right, and if we move it somewhere else, that's all right. So I think with that, I would entertain a motion. We would need a motion, correct, Mr. Wilson?
So this is listed as an action item tonight, so I think staff is looking for some direction on how to proceed.
So your three options are no dog park at all in the city, dog park but in a different location, or dog park at this location would be the three options.
I would move for a dog park at a different location.
Second.
Motion second. Further discussion. Roll call, please.
Borders,
Aye.
Anthony,
I'm kind of confused on this one. So we're supporting a dog park, but we don't
Different location.
want it here. So I think this would have been a good location for it. I'm going to say nay.
Wilhelm,
A dog park in a different location, aye.
Malloy,
Aye.
Wolf,
I'm a little confused too, because I think that if the people wanted a dog park there, what we've designed, I'd be okay with that.
Yeah,
So I'm gonna go nay.
yeah.
Okay, so it's 3-2. So the decision is pursue a dog park, but in a different location. Let me throw something out
Did
at you.
Lynn vote? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
yes, you did.
I want to throw something out, and just a thought. Again, I don't have a preference one way or another. If in fact people thought the entire park was going to be taken out and converted to a dog park, and that was the basis for their decision, I see you nodding, and that's fine. I don't care. I'm asking the question. I'm not soliciting input at this point. But if in fact people thought the dog park was going to be, the entire park was going to be taken out, and a dog park was going to be put in, might any of those people feel differently if they saw the schematic? And would it be worth, if they're looking for a different area, would it be worth circulating the new design? And of course, like Joe says, maybe nobody would be happy with it, to those people and asking them for input.
That's what I'm talking about.
So we could put together a workshop and send out notice, Facebook, Coeur d'Alene Press via
Okay.
normal channels talking about the dog park and dog park design to take
One second.
input if the council desired to do something like that.
And the answer still may be no, and that's absolutely fine with me. I just want to make sure that everybody sees what was proposed before they make their decision.
I guess what I'm hearing is no on this location, but if we go out and we look at other locations and we do a workshop that is set just for public, or I mean, just for public input on a dog park, and it comes back that there is a desire, could that be brought back to you?
Well, I guess it goes back to what the mayor and I are talking about, Dave. I guess if I were giving you direction, I'd say, put together the presentation, either do a workshop or go out and knock on the doors and say, hey, what do you think about this? Again, I'm more inclined from the people in the neighborhood what they want in their park. And if they don't want that design, then I don't want that design.
So what I think Al's saying is the Parks and Recreation, we're kicking it back to the Parks and Recreation Commission to do a workshop, and
Yeah,
with
more
the
information.
full disclosure, what the design is going to be and the publicity on it, and then.
Again, and Singing Hills may still be a no, and I'm absolutely fine with that. But again, I think let's just get it out to where, if it doesn't go back to Singing Hills, not a problem at all. But with a design so people know what it would look like.
I'm fine with that.
Okay? Thank you.
You guys look confused. Do you,
Do you know what you need?
I think so.
okay.
You're sending it back to the Park Rec Commission to do another public workshop, but do you just want input only from the residents of Quail Run, Singing Hills, Harmony Place, or is it open to the whole community?
I think it should be open, but I think it's most important to those who live
Heaviest
there.
weight.
So I think you open it up, but I think if it's going to a specific area, you definitely make sure that those folks are notified in a particular subdivision.
So I'm going to clarify this for Shannon's benefit for the minutes. So the motion that was approved was to say no dog park at this location, but subsequently you've recommended that there be some consideration of essentially another round of public outreach and see how that changes, and then potentially depending on how that shakes out, it may come back to you for a chance to reconsider that decision to move it to some other location.
Correct.
Would that be a public hearing, or is that just going to be the Parks Department coming back?
So that would be to be determined. I mean, we can set a public hearing on anything the council wants us to have a hearing on. So I don't know that we need a motion on that at this point. I think the idea is, I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and the minutes are going to be accurate, that
Yeah, I think we can
essentially
determine
that it was denied tonight. The council may reconsider that if there's sufficient public input that calls for locating the park there. And then we'd bring
The
that back
best
and ask
answer
for
is
your
to
direction.
make it a public hearing.
Fine by me, but like Warren said, we can do that later too.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess my intent in making the motion is that I don't want to move forward with that park in Singing Hills right now. Because the information we've gotten is, I don't see enough support for it.
Well,
Yeah, and that's
why I
kind of
said-
what I was trying to clarify.
Right.
The motion tonight that was approved is that it's not to be built there. and then trying to reconcile that with at least some potential interest and maybe reconsidering that if there's public support for doing it there. So
that's why I
we'd
threw
have
it
to
out
come
as-
back to council to reconsider that decision.
Correct.
That's why I threw it out as an option. I don't care if they do it or not, but just, you know, they may want to make sure everybody knows what they're looking at. Okay? Thank you. Next item up, new business, Poline Avenue and Cecil Road and the Mullen Avenue and Cecil Road Project Consultant Professional Services Agreement.
Good evening, council. Jim Mulcahy, staff engineer, City of Post Falls. I'm here tonight to request the approval for the professional service agreement with JUB for the 2022 City of Post Falls Urban Renewal Safety and Capacity Projects. July 6th, City Council approved the MOU with the Urban Renewal District for the design and construction of the improvements for both Cecil and Poline and Mullen and Poline for consideration and modifications with this project. So let's first take a look at Poline and Cecil. We're all aware of what's going on here. The design will consist of either a traffic study or a roundabout. JUB would be reviewing the data that's at this location and recommend either one of these two options for this location for construction. Along with that would be the extending of the curb and sidewalk to the east on the south side, and the multi-use path from the storage units to the western boundary of that existing property, vacant property line. Additionally, with the Knapp subdivision, there was previously a cash out for that subdivision for frontage improvements, which would be incorporated with this project as well. So we would combine the two. The total project budget for this from URA is $1.3 million with the developer cash out of $150,000. Design and construction management costs for this is $204,046.47 from Urban Renewal for that design portion and construction management of from URA, with the $60,010.93 from the developer's cash out. So with that, we'll take a look at the second project, which is Mullen Avenue. Mullen Avenue right now consists of the signal at Mullen with that center island turn pocket that has a few restricted left turn outs, two on the north side and one at the south side at the Walmart parking lot. The new design would consist of JUB doing modifications to the signal timing at the signal, and the extension of the island that would go beyond Mullen or Walmart's west entrance point, and creating a 3/4 turn access movement there. It does on the north side create two right-in, right-outs with those properties, but as I'll come to more information here in a couple slides, you'll see the main reason why we're trying to do this. The budget for this project is $110,000, with the design and construction management portion of this at $49,544.31. Main issue for this design with that continuous island going up is that this is considered one of the top 10 locations of accidents in the city of Post Falls. So it's a dangerous corridor as it is because of that west entrance in and out of Walmart. Right now there has been 33 accidents at that location in the last 5 years, of which 50% of those were injuries, and 95% of those were that left turn movement, trying to get out of the parking lot. So by putting this into place, This should alleviate those right, or those left turn accidents actually getting back out onto Mullen Avenue. You can also see a couple of those accidents just to the east of that main entrance from Walmart. So the goal tonight is to have council approve the professional service agreement with JUB. Our goal is to get the design started now, have the bid go early winter so that we can get the project constructed early spring or late spring or early summer. And hopefully try to prevent some of these accidents at this location. So with that, Mayor and Council.
Questions of Jim? Joe?
Has there ever been any consideration of putting a traffic signal at that Walmart entrance there?
I don't think the feasibility for a parking lot is a viable thing at this point. That would have to be probably something that would need to be addressed by JUB for that kind of type of question. Normally, we try not to do something like similar to a Yokes facility with a major street having a parking lot have control over that type of a scenario. It's a good question. We can follow up with that. But I don't think that was considered.
I've seen it other places, and it works well, obviously, getting in and out of the parking lot, and I'm not sure how well it would work at that location. My concern with this particular location is if, say you're coming from just west of Walmart, to get back to where you came from, you got to go around a pretty long horn to get back.
And that would be the disadvantage at that point, correct?
So I think that would be a pretty major inconvenience to a lot of people every day, whereas a traffic signal there may minimize that inconvenience if you can turn left both in and out of that
And that
spot.
possibility could be addressed within this portion. I can bring that back. I don't know exactly all the information in the MOU, but that definitely could be a question that could be.
It would require an
Addressed later.
amendment to the MOU because we have not funded for a traffic signal in the MOUs, and there's a cap on the amount. So, not to say you can't do this, but if we were to do that and the recommendation is a traffic signal, we would need to negotiate with Urban Renewal on the reimbursement.
So the additional cost probably, with the MOU.
That's something
Makes
that
sense.
we could move forward with this and still concurrently consider a traffic light, right? Correct?
Yeah, you can move forward with this tonight if that's your desire, and then on a sidetrack, I suppose, we could reach out and see if that's a doable thing to move forward with, as something else at that intersection or not.
Because I would hate to reject this if a traffic signal isn't even doable, but I think it'd be nice to look into it.
Bob, do you have something to add?
Bob Steele, Community Development Director. I just wanted to note, right now there is a limited amount of funding that's available through the URA. The MOU was set up for the 110,000 and change. And with that, there is the understanding that a lot of the traffic patterns will be modified, which is why they're looking at the light primarily at Cecil and Mullen, so that there's the anticipation that more traffic will be coming out of Walmart to Cecil and back onto Mullen. This is essentially a quicker fix at a less cost than $1 million light would be. And we do only have until the end of next year to spend the money, so we do have that facing us as well. So.
Thanks for that clarification.
Any other questions? Jim? Entertain a motion.
I would move to approve the Poleline Avenue, Cecil Road, and the Mullen Avenue and Cecil Road Project Consultant Professional Services Agreement.
Second.
Motion second. Further discussion. Roll call, please.
Anthony,
Aye.
Wilhelm,
Aye.
Malloy,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Borders.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Next item up is the services agreement with Gunderson Consulting and Communication Site Services.
All right. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Craig Bornpole, Utilities Manager for the City of Post Falls. And I'm here to talk to you tonight about a services agreement with Gunderson Consulting and Communication Site Services. And before I get started, I'll express some appreciation to John Beecham and Field Harrington, who assisted in evaluating the qualifications of consultants and negotiating the terms of this proposed agreement. So the city has several assets throughout the city that have proven attractive to communications companies seeking to place antennas, towers, etc. So of those, there is a tower at the Water Reclamation Facility site. It should be noted that this is a tower lease, so the city doesn't own the tower. We just lease the space. There's a tower company that handles the leases for antennas, etc. There's the north standpipe. You can see at the top there, communications equipment. They take advantage of the height of the tower of our standpipe for that. There's communications equipment at Ford Rock Tank. This is at Black Bay Park up at the top there. And out at the west, our west standpipe, you can see it's a little clearer on top. There is some communications equipment up there, but I would anticipate as development moves that direction, that'll become more and more attractive to companies to try and take advantage of that space. So, status of communication leases. We currently have 6 leases. One of them is slated for renewal. The company has reached out to initiate that process, and we've recently been approached with a new proposal. So to date, these leases have been negotiated by our staff. John had negotiated some. I've assisted with some. And it's an area that we don't work in, but it is a value to the city, and we want to take advantage of those assets. So we've worked through those leases that have been proposed. So what we're looking for now is actually to enter into a services agreement with Gunderson to assist with these lease evaluations, management, renewal negotiations. They're a company that has decades of experience in this space, and important to me is they provide landlord consulting services. So they don't offer their services to any of the cell tower companies or wireless companies. They really look at it from the landowner perspective, which I think is a good advantage to the city. Other advantages, it would ensure that the city is maximizing our return of these assets. I think a question came up in the last lease renewal of if we were getting market rate compared to other towers in the area, and our experiences with our leases that we have. So we really don't have that deep knowledge of what the going market rate is and making sure we're getting that. They do. This is the space they work in, so an advantage there. Their knowledge, they look at some of the nuances in a lease and make sure we're not setting ourselves up for disaster down the road. This model would allow us to maintain ownership of each lease. We have a little bit more control when we own the leases. And it would allow staff to focus on our core work objectives. Again, this is their professional space and can help us out. We can work in our professional space and keep our systems operating. So the financials of the proposal, it is an on-call contract. At the consultant's current rate, their present rate is $200 an hour, so there is an expense there. The on-call contract would allow us to control costs by only utilizing it when we realize that the value of their services are going to exceed that cost. So there is, it's at our discretion. Want to be upfront, there are some alternatives. We don't need to move forward with this. So we can continue to negotiate the terms of each lease as we have and as they come up. Or the city has also been approached by several companies which buy out leases, and they then go on to manage those. We get a lump sum contract or lump sum payment, and they then own the leases. And again, we would lose some of that control that I think we appreciate right now. Really can evaluate, make sure we're not in conflict with some of the police communications, et cetera. So it is an alternative, but I think what we're proposing is most advantageous.
Craig, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I think I would be a fan, I would not be a fan of giving up the control and selling the leases themselves. $200 an hour. I'm just trying to get my head around that. From your perspective, if we have these folks come in and negotiate the contracts, are we going to be receiving a good return on that investment?
I would say we're proposing this because right now we think we do. We think we would, where it looks like there's a little bit of work coming up. One of them, a lease renewal, and that may not require as many hours, but would give us a chance to means test. Are they really providing that value? So our expectation is that we may not fully realize the entirety of that value, but it's not a dead expense. It's going to allow us to compete in the space.
Well, my concern would be, if it's $200 an hour, they take 10 hours, you got two grand out there. How long does it take us to recoup that investment? So I'm not opposed to it. Personally, I think it's a little steep, but consultants are.
Sure.
So I was just curious about your financial impact on it.
I think over the term of a lease, some of them 5 years, some of them as long as 20 years, we're going to recoup that cost.
Steve?
So I've dealt with some of these leases with Verizon, wanting to put them on some of the ball fields, and they can become quite complicated. And so I spent probably 20 to 30 hours just trying to work with Verizon in different meetings. So would there be a cap? Because you wouldn't want to get to the place where you got a lease and you're paying the consultant more than what you're getting for the lease. So do they guarantee us some profit? Because I know what Quad Park was getting, which was pretty substantial on that for theirs. But my biggest concern is that $200 an hour, is there a cap per lease, like 10 hours or whatever, or is it just an open-ended contract?
I would say somewhere in between. As each lease renewal would come up, I think we would approach them and get their best guess sort of as to what we're looking at, and then make a decision if we want to engage them on that renewal or new lease, whatever it is. Again, if we think that value is going to be there, then we move forward. If we don't think so, then we do what we have been doing and work on those leases ourselves.
Good. Joe?
You actually just answered my question with that answer, so.
Al?
I'm just curious, what's a standard lease bring us?
I might divert, it's in the thousands per month, 12. Yeah, 1,500 to 2,000 per month.
Okay,
So,
okay. I'm back to what the mayor was saying. I was a little concerned at $200 a month, or $200 an hour, but I think it, I guess if we find out we get burned or it wasn't such a great deal on the first one, we just don't have to do it again.
And it sounds like we have some flexibility, as you say. So you visit with them. If you don't want to use them on a particular lease, you don't have to.
I like the idea.
Yeah.
I would move to approve the services agreement with Gunderson Consulting and Communications Site Services LLC.
Second.
Motion second. Further discussion. Shannon, please take the roll.
Anthony,
Aye.
Wilhelm,
Aye.
Malloy,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Borders.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thanks, Craig. Next item on the agenda tonight is citizens' issue, and this section of the agenda is reserved for citizens wishing to address the council regarding a city-related issue that is not on the agenda. And wishing to testify? And as you know, sir, timer. Name for the record, please.
Howard Burns, Rocky Point Road. You have a handout that you're getting. I came up with a second issue while I was sitting here, and that was looking at the Green Meadows zone change. It would be nice if, when you're showing a CCS zone change, or a zone change to commercial, that you go out beyond the immediate area, because commercial travels from some distance, and show zone changes that are currently in process to CCS, so you folks could get an idea of just how much commercial is planned within, say, a half a mile. Because we know at Greens Ferry and Prairie, there's a commercial zone change CCS request in, and we know that in the North Place East project, the commercial was out on Prairie plus in the plan. There's a lot of commercial being proposed along Prairie, and you look at it as just as a single item, you don't get the perspective of just how much commercial is in the process. What's going on here? So I would think that you might want to ask for that. But the reason that I'm really here is the handout. I'd like to ask for a special hearing or a special report to the City Council on the Hutter Bypass and the I think it's pronounced Cortaire or Cortere or whatever project. It's not in Post Falls and it's not in CDA, but it's across in your sphere of influence. So that's right next to the Highlands Golf Course on the east, above Interstate 90 on the north. It bisects Hutter. So on the east side of Hutter, it is in CDA sphere of influence, and on the west side of Hutter, it is in Post Falls. And the Hutter right-of-way, or the Hutter bypass, goes right through the Post Falls portion of that property. The developer has a site plan on the website that ignores the Hutter bypass and has it planned, shows a park plan, and you have it in front of you. That was taken right off the website. And you have the Hutter bypass that KMPO put out and say, this is the alignment we want. And I think that the developer is playing the city He's going to try to get approvals and say, my land is worth a lot of money and you got to pay me for my right-of-way. And he knew when he bought that land in 2019 that the Hutter bypass went there. It's been on the books since 2009. And if it doesn't happen there, that's the southern terminus of the Hutter bypass, it won't happen. It's done. Last but not least, Pole Line and Hanley are being connected in 2022 according to the plans. And I'd like to believe that when they do the connection between Pole Line and Hanley, making it one street and it now goes through, that intersection is being done with the Hutter bypass in mind, unless it's not going to happen, and then it should be ignored. But it needs to be considered, and I hope it is being, but I don't know, because all this is invisible. Something's clearly happening, but the public isn't seeing it. So I would ask that the city get it out in front of the public ahead of time and try to make the Hutter bypass happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Next up on the agenda is administrative staff reports, and we have 4 tonight. Development activity of vacant residentially zoned land.
How's it going? Bob Seal, Community Development Director. So I wanted to bring this to you guys tonight. This is a little bit longer than I originally intended, but I do want to bring back this type of information to you on a semi-regular basis. Kind of what we're really looking at is what land is available within the city limits now, how many platted lots do we have available for development. This helps you make decisions when it comes to the annexation and zoning requests that come forward in the future. Again, everybody has their own interpretation of numbers, but I'm going to kind of give you the breakdown as to what we're looking at along the way. So the parameters of this is really just looking at residential land that has been annexed into the city, the acreage of the vacant platted lots, the number of the vacant platted lots, and then also the acreage of the vacant unplatted lots. The unplatted lots being those large swaths of land that do not have roadways going through them and have not been bonded, so therefore there's no individual lots to build on. As I kind of noted in the definition, general definitions there. So I'm going to also pull up this application as I get near the end of it, but just kind of looking at, as of last week, there were a little over 115 acres of vacant platted lots within the city, which equaled about 400 vacant platted lots. There are currently, and just as kind of a note, which I noted down at the bottom, is that there are actually 40 permitted homes that need to be structured that have not been removed from that 400 number. So in reality, there's 360 platted lots available within the city limits. It was only a couple weeks ago when I pulled this up, and we were actually at less than that, so it means that a plat had come through, had been put in. Again, platted is typically when you've got the infrastructure, the roadway, the sewer, water in place and ready to permit the individual lots, or it's been bonded so that they can begin to sell the individual lots for building. The rest of the land within the city limits under the residential end of things is approximately 682 acres or 683 acres of unplatted residential land. I wanted to be able to kind of provide some perspective here. When I had staff run some numbers on June 29th, there were 702 acres within the city limits. And I broke it down. I wanted to pull out, just to kind of give you some perspective. Those 4 bullet points show 310 acres, 108 acres, and 25 acres, 3 different major parcels that are owned by, or 3 different land holdings by Schneimiller Partners, Schneimiller Land Company, Schneimiller Brothers, Inc. That's Greenstone. And they are doing Montrose, they're also doing North Place East. 173 acres are owned by Lakeside Real Estate Holdings, which is primarily Architera doing construction there. These are both reputable developers. My purpose of showing this is that it indicates that 87% of the developable land, the unplatted land within the city, is held by the 2 developers. And they are working with the city. They've been working on these developments for many years. Montrose has been going for longer than 15 years, I believe, up to 20 maybe. Foxtail has been going for a number of years. So they work slowly. they build quality homes, or I'm not, they're working on their developments, and they have a certain number of houses that they can do per year with their construction companies. So I also kind of broke it down, just kind of looking at how many homes were constructed within the city over the last 4 years, well, 3 years plus up to date today, to kind of give you an idea as to how fast these types of developments do typically go. For Architerra, just to kind of, again, a few numbers out there, in 18 there was 52 single-family homes that they did. 19 of those were in Foxtail. We'll jump to 2020, 110 single-family residential units were done. 29 of those were in Foxtail. So it kind of gives you an idea that Foxtail is slowly developing out. Foxtail is probably around 173 acres that was remaining, in addition to some of the platted lots that they have there. As a note, in 2021, Architerra has done 78 single-family residences in Foxtail. It's all been done in Foxtail. None of them have COs yet, but they've all been permitted. Kind of look at Greenstone. It's the same type of thing where you've got 41 houses, and then 31 were in Montrose. 39 houses, 20 were in Montrose. 28 houses, 26 were in Montrose. So it kind of goes down that while they are building within the city, they're building a certain amount within their developments that are large land holdings that have been annexed into the city and zoned for residential purposes. I just kind of wanted to show the scales that I'm showing there. That's the number of single-family housing units that were constructed in those years, 18, 19, 20, and then 21. The dark gray, the larger portion, that's the rest of the housing units that were constructed throughout the city. The colored ones, the top two, I guess that's a brown and a yellow of color. It's kind of difficult to tell on this thing. That's the portion that Architerra and Greenstone did within the city.
Hey, Bob, go back real quick.
Yep.
So the slide before said that between Greenstone and Architerra, they basically control 87% of the available lots.
Land.
Or land, than lots. Yeah. But then the next slide shows that the bulk is somebody else.
So those are the bulks. That's the housing that's being constructed within the city.
Okay.
So the 87% is 87% of the, well, it was 702 acres at that time. 87% of that is held by basically Greenstone and Architerra.
But they're not building on them.
They're building on them at their preferred rate. They've got a lot of employees. They've got a lot of construction going on. So they have these planned out at 15 to 20 year build outs. It's basically, it's their economic development. That's their development model. That's how they do it. Right. So that's what's happening. So the rest of these, the rest of the houses that were built, the balance of that, 543 or 587 houses that were built that year. The balance of that was constructed by the individual smaller builders, or they could be bigger, but they're buying individual lots throughout the city in those potentially smaller subdivisions, the 5, 10, 20 acre subdivisions that you're seeing that come forward. Those are the ones that individual landowners are working with a local developer to help them get roads installed, get the infrastructure in place, and then sell off those lots potentially individually. Greenstone and Architerra, typically those developments, they put their Greenstone and Architerra homes into those developments. So the rest of these are kind of picking up the balance of that. And of course, as you note, not all the homes that Greenstone and Architerra developed within the city were all in Montrose and Foxtail. They developed in other subdivisions as well. I'm using them as an example because they basically hold the 87% of the land within the city limits. So I just wanted to show if this link works. This is an application that is available, and of course this doesn't work in that one. But I'm just going to go back to it. Oh, hey, now. So this is the application that was developed. We're still at the 400. It means nothing's been structured. And it does also take into consideration, just so you're aware, so it does have commercial and industrial land as well represented. So if you have questions on that. Oh, and it looks like we're at 376 lots, so some of it has been modified. But you can see, take for instance, we can jump up here to Prairie. You can see all the red dots. Those are areas where houses can be constructed. Those are vacant parcels. Go to Foxtail. You can see the land that has not been platted and subdivided yet is all these areas with the blue dots essentially covering that. And it indicates that under the PUD there were 740 single-family units, 124 multifamily units permitted within that PUD at that time. And you can see here is that this is one of their platted parts that they did this year. There's only one left on there. The rest of it has already been, permits have been issued for those. So they are moving. It's just that again, it's all a lengthy process for everyone involved. You can see that these were a couple that were approved last year. We got Wildflower and Gabriel. Gabriel has been working through the process of doing the individual pieces. Wildflower has been going through the process of, they changed from an R1 to an R2, and then they went from duplex and are working towards potentially doing twin homes. So it's all, it's a process. But I just wanted to be able to show this to you. It is available to the public if they desire to see it. We are working to get a dashboard put on the website that would include this amongst a couple others that are just good informational pieces. I also just wanted to briefly cover some of the where we saw annexations over the past 5 or 6 years, just kind of looking from 2015 forward. And I broke it down again. These are, the color is the year the area was annexed. However, I'm going to refer to simply the residential zoning that was applied in terms of acreage. So I just wanted to kind of show that we, over the last, well, since 2015 to present, 256 acres of R1 was the primary annexation annexed zone. Then you've got the R1S at 21 acres, R2 at 32 acres, RM at 4.68, R3 at 13.2 acres. So they're kind of, primarily you're looking at R1 is what was annexed since 2015. And again, where the majority of the annexations for that residential uses were up in this area. So I just kind of wanted to be able to show that. And part of that spreadsheet that I did not end up including in here, it does indicate that the majority of those lands that had been annexed since 2015 have already been platted, have already been done. There is very little left to plat or lots that are left to be built on since 2015. So a lot of the lots that you have outstanding that are available are potentially even lots that aren't really developable, and they've been on the books for many years. We also wanted to quickly look at county pockets. This is something that's come up at council meetings and has been brought up to me on a couple of different occasions from a couple of different counselors. It's just kind of looking at county pockets, and I wanted to just kind of pull a sample as somewhat representative. So we looked at parcels that are greater than 1 acre in size and are considered underdeveloped. So they don't have apartments on them, and they don't have mobile home parks on them. Again, these are all county pockets within the greater city limits. Not that I would look at 1 acre parcel as being very developable unless it literally has water and sewer running in front of it, and even then you're not going to get much out of it. But because it could potentially add to the greater whole, I wanted to at least show it. So what you're looking at citywide is approximately 961 acres of undeveloped county pockets that could be potentially developed in the future, or that we would potentially see development in the future. Some of that I didn't want to count in it, the subdivisions that are 1/3 acre parcels that have homes on them. it just did not seem like something that was essentially relevant. Someday, maybe those do come into the city, and they will probably come into the city with the homes on. They will need water or sewer services at some point, most likely. But really, it was a focus on some of these more central areas. And you've watched this area up here off of Greens Ferry, around that bluegrass area. These have been coming in for the last couple of years. You've seen that piece by piece, 5 acres by 5 acres coming in. That's because the infrastructure is not very far away. The water and sewer is not too hard to get there, so they've been relatively easily coming into the city. We start looking, it starts getting a little more complicated when you start looking at the other pockets that are still available. And while you've got a handful of 5 or 10 acre parcels within the center of this one, you end up with more along the lines of 2 and 3 acre parcels down here. But in order to get water and sewer to these areas, we're talking having to primarily move most likely from a west to east progression. Otherwise, it's you're going to need to have a developer that actually is coming in with a number of parcels at the same time. So how these develop out in the future is still to be seen. I don't anticipate it happening anytime in the near future, as in the next 5 to 10 years. When you kind of look at some of these other areas, like this is another bulk of land, this is going to be a long way off. In terms of being able to get the sewer lines. The master plan calls for it to come, basically flow this direction, so we would need to extend it. It would need to be extended down this way. But again, you're looking at these smaller individual parcels. The way that the water is going to flow is most likely anything within this area is going to have to pump up to get there. So it's nothing is ideal for development within a lot of the county pockets. We will start to see them come in, but most likely from an east to west progression, and there's only so much land that I would consider developable within it, easily developable. So I think that we'll continue to see, again, that bluegrass area coming in because the services have been extended and are easily extendable for a 5 or 10 acre piece. But I guess it's all to be seen. Any questions?
Questions, Bob?
Go
ahead, Linda.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I just have a comment. Thank you so much for doing this, Bob. I really do appreciate it. Probably just to boil it all down, can we, put it in simple terms, last year did 482 single-family permits, and between Arcatera and Montrose, they did 170. And so that left the smaller developers doing the rest. However, those two developers own 87% of the unplatted land right now.
Correct.
So that is just a really kind of shocking, when he sent this over, it's just shocking. Because they can only build so many a year. And they use their own people, I believe, so, like Bob told me that. They use their own people, so they're not gonna build more than they just normally build. And so it seems like, so there's like, I don't know, 87 acres out there that some other
Everybody else.
company is going to plat. So where are we gonna get the rest of the 482 houses? I mean, I'm just saying, I'm just wondering.
Just as kind of something that I didn't know, when I kind of started at the beginning noting that there's 400 platted lots, and I guess actually after clicking on that button, it was around 376 platted lots. You really want to be able to have, probably approximately 3 years worth of lots available to develop out. Otherwise, the market is just going to be unbalanced. And based on the number of housing units, just single-family housing units, we'd probably be much better position for the city, for the market in general, if there were about 2,000 platted lots out there now. But right now, at the rate that they've been going, it's basically they're platting and building immediately.
Right. Oh,
So I had a couple questions on that. One, this is what you show here is residential, but it doesn't break it down between like single-family and multifamily.
Well, no, it doesn't. But as you know, as John's PowerPoint showed earlier tonight, there's approximately citywide, you've got 48% R1 and approximately 2.5% R3 or R2 each. So put that in some kind of proportion. Most likely, you don't have much of this to be anything besides R1. There hasn't been a ton of R3 zones come through as of recent times. And again, those would come across in either acreage or in, because they often are not their own individual lots. I mean, they're larger pieces of property typically, and those run under the site plan. There is, whoops, that's not the button I wanted. If you want to play around with this type of thing.
Do we have access to that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you send it out so we know how to get into it?
We can send a link out so
Yeah,
that
and I'm gonna-
everybody can get into it.
Yeah, and we're going to have a dashboard put up on the website so that it can be grabbed. But it does indicate the site plan approved multifamily units yet to CO, I believe, is that what that number is. Now, this number does not get updated very often. I don't think it's been updated this year. It relies, we can't do it. It's not a standard click a button, have it updated. It's kind of a bit of a process. But that is included within PUDs, that's site plans, that's all over the city, and it's been around that number for a while. But these numbers do get updated as new plans are approved. And as it noted here, there's 124 multifamily units that are currently permitted for Foxtail. So that kind of gives you an idea what that one shows. Tullamore had 520 multifamily units. There's still 33 units technically remaining. Again, they don't always build out to exactly those numbers, but they come in close. So that's kind of just to, again, this is kind of a broad overview of the majority of what I wanted to be able to give you just a touch of information.
So the other thing was that the annexations and North Place property we just rezoned a few weeks ago, a month ago. That shows up on here as acreage, but not platted.
Correct.
Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So-
And then the county pocket that you indicated that it's a pretty good sized pocket right there in the middle of the city. Would it make sense to just put water and sewer through there and make that more advantageous for people to come into the city versus now they're going, there's no reason for me to do this. I mean,
Well, I mean, and that is something to consider. Probably an LID would be the best route to go on something along those lines.
it's expensive, I'm sure.
So it's difficult to do an LID when it's in the county.
Yeah.
And we are not funded in our water and sewer to pre-fund developer costs. And so that would be the other issue we had with
Okay.
trying to come up with the funds to put in that water and sewer. It's definitely something we can talk about and look at, but there are some challenges with doing it, and you couldn't, again, do an urban renewal really there because of it being a county pocket at this time.
Okay.
Joe?
So often we see the stats about what percentage of the city is single-family, multifamily. That's always presented in terms of land area, correct?
The percentage that John recently showed would be, yes, a percentage of the overall land area and so how much of the land area within the city is zoned R1.
I think what would be useful for me and the public also is to see what land areas those zones and also number of units that is single-family versus multifamily. I think would be, because if 2% of the land area is R3, but you can get 4 times as many units, then that's a vastly different number. And I think that some people look at that as a bit, and I know it's not intended that way, but it kind of understates the amount of multifamily to single-family.
I'm not saying that it doesn't. And still, the multifamily units, I believe that the housing percentage is approximately, multifamily is at around 27%.
That's what I remember hearing
of the
too.
city.
I think it'd be more transparent if we just present both stats side by side.
Well, I wasn't necessarily even trying to present
Right,
my
I know.
stat. So.
And
There's a lot of different ways you can present data and information and, how it's inferred. and determining everybody, like I said at the very beginning of this, everybody's going to take something else from, hey, what's 400 housing unit? Yeah, we got 400 lots. That's either a holy hell, that's all we've got, or oh my God, we've got that many.
Right.
So, you know.
But thank you for doing this again. This is excellent.
Steve?
I just have a question, Mom. Thank you again. It's great information. When they pull their permit, is there any time limit on it, or can they, once they get a permit to build something, can they take 5 years, 6 years, 1 year, or is it?
I believe the building permit expires in about 6 months or a year.
Okay, so they have to start
Unless they
process
do work, and then
in
they
a
continue
year,
to go
so.
through that. Yeah.
So as long as they keep working on it, they can renew it. It's
Oh,
what
okay.
happens is if you let it sit for that amount of time without doing anything, then it lapses.
But if they go in and do some, say, earthwork or some construction, then that renews it
Yeah,
again?
I mean, you can drag it out for a long time. That is certainly not happening in the market that we're in today. If you sometimes when there was when the recession came through, a lot of the areas of the country, and I'm sure it wasn't that much different here, but you probably did see some houses start and ultimately stop because they couldn't afford to finish construction. There was no market to sell that certain particular housing type, things along those lines.
And what I've discovered, if you go to buy a new stove or a dishwasher, that most of them have already been set aside by developers to build on, and that's holding them up just trying to get appliances for their houses and stuff, so. It's a supply demand of all the amenities that go into a house to finish it.
Good. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
Next item, conflict of interest. Mr. Wilson. Been a topic that has been of interest lately. Not of interest, but should have been proclaimed a lot.
That's why we're talking about it. Since it's been in the news and people have been talking about conflicts of interest, I thought it would be a good time to sort of explain what it is that we do and why we do it. This is not new information for you all. When I was putting this together, I looked back to the training that Mr. Cafferty and I did. That was exactly a year ago. We met out at the Trailhead Shelter and spent, 2.5, 3 hours going over this stuff, and we do that routinely. In fact, we'll probably be looking to do another long training, probably December-ish sometime. And because it's one of those things that I think it's good for us to always talk about and remember. So I'm going to run through this relatively quickly. So when we talk about conflicts of interest and bias, this really matters when we're dealing with quasi-judicial matters. It doesn't really matter so much in legislative matters. Tonight, the hearing on changing the code, that's a legislative matter. You can consider whatever you want. If we're talking about a site-specific land use matter, we need to really pay attention to conflicts and bias. I've listed up there all the types of quasi-judicial land use matters. One that throws people, annexations are a legislative matter, but when you're assigning the zoning district to that property that you're annexing, that's quasi-judicial. So we end up defaulting to the same rules for both of them, even though they're technically different. So the reason, and we saw it tonight, and we do this every council meeting, and it's built into our agenda, we require a disclosure of conflicts of interest, ex parte contacts, site visits, and we do that for a number of reasons. And part of that is it helps ensure impartiality. It protects the ability to know and rebut facts, which is one of the big things about a quasi-judicial hearing, is you have the right to present your own information, and you also have the right to rebut what everybody else said. And so it helps to do that. It helps us to make sure that we have an open and a fair process. And it also helps to make sure that the people who are sitting up making the decision aren't making profit off of their decisions. The Local Land Use Planning Act has a specific conflict of interest provision. That's kind of unique. Most of the actions that local governments do falls under the Ethics in Government Act, which is a broader, more broad brush ethics requirement that applies to every other decision that we make. This one has a standalone, and the rules are different, and it's a little bit more strict in some ways. So essentially, I'm not going to read this here because I've got it bullet pointed on the next one. Essentially, what the statute requires is that if a council member, if a planning commission member, if a city employee we have a conflict, if us, being the person, our employer, our business partner, a business associate, or a close family member have a financial or an economic interest in the outcome of the action. So if you have one of those things, you have a conflict. So I've got some carrots on some of those because we want to talk about what some of those things mean. The first one being, what's a business associate? We've heard a little bit about that recently, that if one of the owners of your employer potentially has a different business that they're a co-owner in, and they're developing something, that's a business associate, that causes a conflict. That's not what Idaho law requires. So first of all, I'd tell you, this term is not defined in the Local Land Use Planning Act, but if you look to the Ethics in Government Act, they define a similar term, businesses with which a public official is associated. And that definition is any business of which the official or member of their household is a director, officer, owner, partner, employee, holder of stock over $5,000. So these things mean something, and we look at these things routinely to make sure that we're not falling afoul of those types of rules. We just talked about that. This really doesn't get to the situation where it's the I know you and you know him, and so you have an interest. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking a business associate. You're an employee, you're an officer, you own stock in the entity. Those types of things are what it means to be a business associate. Second degree of consanguinity. That's harder to see on this. This comes straight out of the Attorney General's Ethics in Government Manual. If you look up there, the areas that are in red, that's the first degree of consanguinity. That means that's you, your kids, your parents, your siblings. That's the first degree. Second degree is your cousins, your nieces and nephews, your aunts and uncles, your grandchildren, your grandparents. So if one of those people has a financial stake in the outcome of the decision, you have a conflict. And so it's a relatively limited universe, and I think that's appropriate because, honestly, Idaho's still a relatively small state. Post Falls is still a relatively small town. We know everybody. And so, and I'll tell you, and I've seen this, where I've had seen hearings where a presentation is being made and you find out that some shirt-tail relative is somehow invested in a project. You had no way of knowing. So I can't even imagine trying to keep track of what my nieces and nephews and my cousins are up to and what their investments are. I can't imagine trying to stretch that to the nieces and nephews or cousins of my business associate, which is what some people have recommended, that this should include the second degree of your business partner, the second degree of your business associate. That's not what the statute requires. So that's what it means to be within the second degree. So what is an economic interest? Again, this is not defined in the Act, but we have some case law that's helped us look at this. And generally what it means is that you have a direct financial stake in the outcome of the matter. So a couple of cases, one out of Blaine County from the late 80s, a county commissioner voted on an action that was granting an easement for a power line across their own property. They had a direct financial stake in the outcome of that because they stood to get some money. Another one from Gooding County, this is a little more recent, the employer, in this instance, the council members, the county commissioner's employer was the applicant. Again, that's the employer, that's a direct financial stake. That's a direct impact, directly covered by the statute. What it doesn't get to, and we've seen, and these are a couple, frankly, local examples, it doesn't mean that you have a conflict if you might benefit to the same extent as other people in the community. That's not a conflict. So, for instance, if you have a mayor who happens to be a grocer, that mayor can vote to break a tie if we have a subdivision, even though that grocer might make more money because now there's more customers. That's not a conflict. That's not what's covered by the statute. For instance, again, this one's out of another community, not here, but a mortgage broker doesn't have a conflict voting on approving or denying subdivisions just because there may be more business. They don't have a direct stake in the outcome of that matter that's before them. I think this surprises some folks, but that's just the way this works, and it's by design. And I will tell you, this is way more strict than the Ethics in Government Act. In the Ethics in Government Act, if you have a conflict, what's required is that you declare the conflict on the record and you vote. That's all that's required, is you disclose it. So that's what it means to have a conflict. What's required if you have a conflict, you can't participate in the hearing in any aspect of the decision-making process. So what that means is we ask up front, if you have a conflict, you step down. You don't participate in the debate, you don't participate in the decision. And I will tell folks, without divulging any confidences, I routinely hear from staff members, planning commission members, city council members, mayor, who potentially have a conflict, and we talk through these issues. And we think through what's the level of relationship, how close is it, is there a financial stake? And if there's an issue, I've yet to see anyone say, I'm going to do this anyways. It just doesn't happen. More routine is people say, I'm going to avoid this one, even though it's not a technical conflict, because I don't like the appearance of this one. And we see that with some regularity. And I think that's the right thing, and it's also fair to point out that a knowing violation, it's a criminal violation, so we take this pretty seriously. Quickly, I wanted to jump into a couple of other quick things that we touch on routinely. It's not just the conflict of interest that we get concerned about, it's also bias, meaning that you've made up your mind in one way or the other, and you're not going to change your mind regardless of what the facts are that come in. And again, that is one of the most important things we do, is provide an unbiased decision maker so that people know that there is procedural fairness for the decision. What it means to have a bias, and this is a quote from Bonner County, and I'm only going to read part of this, but it's essentially, this was dealing with a county commissioner who made a bunch of statements before a hearing, and the court said, we're going to look at this and we're going to explain what it means. If you said a bunch of stuff that sort of discloses that you've made up your mind, and the court essentially says that if you've made statements that show that you've made up your mind and will not listen to the evidence with an open mind, or will not apply the law, or you've made up your mind about the outcome, you have a bias. That's a due process concern. You need to sit that hearing out. And we talk about this, we train to this routinely. Quickly on ex parte communications, this is another thing that we divulge and we speak to every hearing. What that means is it's a communication that's received outside of the hearing process. It's verbal, it could be in writing, it could be visual. Those contacts need to be disclosed and put in the records so that people have a right or a chance to rebut the information that's been provided to you. And again, this is getting back to a due process concern, that you have the right to present your own evidence and rebut the other guy's evidence. So we make those disclosures routinely to make sure that people have a right to rebut that. And the court tells us that you have to confine your decision to the record produced at the hearing. The purpose of the disclosure is to afford opposing parties with an opportunity to rebut the substance of any ex parte contact. And so that's something that we routinely train to, we speak to. If it happens, we put it in the record. A subtype of that is going out and driving by the site and going and take a looking at it. So you have a hearing coming up, you know where it's at, you drive out, you walk around. Again, an ex parte contact can be visual. You've walked around the site, that's not in the record. If you rely on that in making your decision, you've relied on it on essentially ex parte communications. So the court, in looking at that specific issue, says, you know, if you happen to live in a town like we all do, and it's a small town still, you drive by a lot of places frequently. If you happen to have seen a piece of property unrelated to the hearing, you just say, hey, I know where that's at, it's over there. And that's the extent of the disclosure. That's all that due process requires of us. So we can do what's called a noticed site visit, if that ever comes up, where we send out notice and everybody sort of comes to the site, that everybody has a chance to hear what's going on. But that's pretty darn rare, and I don't know that we necessarily need those, but it is allowed for. So quickly, just in conclusion, I wanted to point out again that we request these disclosures. The council and the planning commission are very good at this. Staff, again, it doesn't come up as often, but there are occasions where a staff member says they have a conflict and they come talk to us. We train for this, we speak to it, and we often see, and I think if people are paying attention, they see routinely members of the council and the commission stepping aside. So that's what the law requires. Hopefully that answers some questions for some folks. It's not as broad, I think, as what some people have assumed it to be, but I think it's appropriately sized for the issues that we deal with. So,
thanks,
questions?
I'm just hoping people who watch this pay attention to it, especially with what's been going on lately. And I was party to that yesterday on several different occasions, and accused of conflict of interest and et cetera, et cetera. Number one, the information the people had was wrong, and there was no conflict. And I just want to reiterate, and I know the entire council does, if there's a conflict or a perceived conflict, I think everyone up here has declared that and not participated. So I think this is very timely information, and I hope people pay attention to it. Thanks for explanations. Park vandalism, and I see Brian coming up. Yes, I'm having hair envy.
Me too.
So, good evening, Mayor and Council. Not a topic we want to talk about often, not something that we try to highlight. We try to make these things go away when they happen and try to reduce the inconvenience to our public wherever possible. But many of you were made aware a week ago, just over a week ago, that we had some vandalism up at Tullamore that definitely hit social media as it impacted one of our playground structures. It was a small screw that was inserted into the slide bedway, and you know, the consensus or a number of the comments were related to the maintenance and operations of our parks facility. And I just wanted to highlight the way our staff responds to our playgrounds and the efforts that they put in on a daily basis, and the way we handle complaints or concerns like this. We go out on a daily basis and do a high frequency inspection of our playgrounds, kind of a custodial level inspection. So this is general park structures, including our playgrounds, highlighted in our playgrounds, and our restroom facilities. We do a cleaning, remove any trash, remove any foreign objects that may be placed in a playground structure. And then we go and clean the restrooms, empty trashes throughout the park, and just do a really brief inspection of any structures to see if there's anything that's changed since the day before. So that's what we do busy season, generally Memorial Day, 1st of April through Labor Day, end of October is kind of our heightened workload. When we get to our off season, those drop to every 2 weeks. But in this scenario, staff would have been out that morning, and then this small screw head would have been installed in that slide. And as soon as we were made aware, responded. By the time we responded, it was already removed. With that response, we notified Post Falls Police. They complete a police report on any vandalism to any of our structures and the like. Not necessarily nuisance level. You know, we have from time to time soap dispenser will get opened up and the soap dumped out on the floor, that sort of thing. We just take care of that and clean that up. We aren't going to involve our officers in taking a report on something like that. But anything that's beyond general cleaning, those are the things that we're involved in the Post Falls Police. Just kind of a highlight overall, park system wide this year. Year to date, we have had 22 occurrences, 31 occurrences, and that's resulted in a little over $11,000 in damage to our parks facilities. Year to date, prior year, 22 occurrences, resulting in $3,300. So we've seen a big increase, not a huge increase in the number of occurrences, but the amount of damage that's happening when each of those happen. That same weekend, we had someone go into Kiwanis Park and broke a number of mirrors, both of the lavatories and every toilet paper dispenser in the park and a drinking fountain. A big dollar occurrence, but you know, that was back up and running, back to the public inside of 3 days. So that's a turnaround we pride ourselves on. That's the kind of response that we get. And then I want to also highlight the police department's partnership in this. After this hit social media, that very next week, I was out meeting with Captain McLean, and we've identified a strategy to try to increase our surveillance and hopefully get this turned around up at the Tullamore neighborhood, so we can not see these kind of damages and hopefully prevent injury from this sort of thing. During the meeting, I actually received a notification via our city's Facebook messaging application that this just happened again between 3:30 and the start of this meeting, where someone installed another screw in the slide at Tullamore. So this is deliberate. This is somebody that is intending to do harm, not just to park facilities, but to little humans. And I really appreciate the PD's quick action in trying to turn this around, and we'll continue to work with them. We'll continue to work with our neighbors in and around the community to hopefully curb this behavior and hopefully catch whoever's doing this.
I think that's most important, is you've got to stop, I think you got to catch people that do it, and I know that's near impossible, but hopefully as you pursue this, if cameras are an option, I know it'll be considered. But
They are installing cameras.
okay, but whatever we can do, and I will take personal joy if you can find the idiots responsible for that and prosecute them to the full extent.
Yeah. We do catch them from time to time. We had more of a nuisance level individual that dropped in firework in a toilet just before the military concert around the 4th of July time. And that young man spent the weekend working the triathlon with us. So
Good.
You got to see, what our staff does do to try to benefit the community, and worked off the number of hours that it took to get that facility turned back around.
There's no excuse for anybody that would put a screw in a slide to hurt a kid,
Yeah.
so.
That's a different level.
Yep. So, any other questions, Brian?
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Steve, go ahead.
I just want to thank Brian for this presentation, because I know you guys can only be so many places at a time, and Pat can only be so many places, but it's the neighborhood that usually is the one that catches the vandals. So just want to state that if you see something in a neighborhood, please contact the Parks Department or Police Department right away, because you guys can't be everywhere, but the neighbors are there, so they have to take some ownership if they know something's happening. And that's how most of the vandals get caught, or by your neighbors. So we can get the word out to them and say, we need your help on these issues, especially when they get to where they're harming kids.
I definitely encourage the public to reach out to our email, parkrepair@postalsidaho.org. That email hits all of our supervisor staff in the Parks Department, so we can dispatch somebody right away to address that. We do monitor the Facebook page as well. The messaging app is better than a comment on a post, for sure. Those two avenues reach me and my supervisor staff, and we can get somebody out and dispatch to that relatively quickly.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Next item up is Water Districts update.
I think you were going to give an intro to it.
Yes, thank you. It's a long meeting. As everyone is aware, a few weeks ago, we had comments made that one of the irrigation districts, water purveyors, was reported in the paper as having issues and breaking down and not having enough water, et cetera, et cetera. And that was simply not true. And so I talked with Shelley, and staff's put together this presentation, and I would ask that when this is done, that you mail copies of whatever you're presenting to Mr. Flowers, so he knows what this information actually was.
On that note, I'm John Beecham, Public Works Director. I am going to present a quick update on water districts and specifically the big three that we have here in the city of Post Falls and their capabilities. I don't know if it'll be as detailed as you might be looking for there, Mr. Mayor. If it's not, I can add to it.
Yeah, but I think the information you provided, we'll let you know, but I think it's important that he knows.
First, just a quick map overview of the city of Post Falls. The dark boundary is city limits. The blue in the center, if I put a mouse on here, this is a city of Post Falls water district. So it's a water district owned by the city of Post Falls and operated by us. On the west side of town, we have East Green Acres Irrigation District. You can see they serve quite a bit of area outside the city limits, and as does Ross Point Water District on the east side of Post Falls. So we've got East Green Acres on the west and Ross Point on the east. It's a little confusing name-wise. The reason I show this is to show that the city does not operate all of the water for the city of Post Falls. I think that's a pretty common misconception. So thought I would state that up front. The information I'm presenting from East Green Acres and Ross Point is not our information. They were kind enough to provide a little bit of update on their capabilities. So if there's detailed questions, I'll follow up with them, but I cannot speak for them and I don't have the information to do so. First of all, I reached out to both Ross Point Water District and East Green Acres, and my first question was, what, if any, issues have you been having, especially with regard to the heat wave in July? Both of them answered no issues really to speak of. no specific issues were mentioned. Ross Point indicated they were running 4 of their 5 wells, and they had a 300 horsepower well on sort of backup as their additional well if one of their other wells went down. They're also looking to the future. They're installing 2 new wells as we speak. They're currently drilling 1. So they are looking to future capacities to be able to address that if that need arises. Asked about water conservation, and Ross Point has a request policy of their users to not water between noon and 6 when most of it is lost to evaporation. They did note that if peak demand continues to increase, that request may be something that they look at making into an actual district policy rather than just a request. East Green Acres is a little bit different, and there's a letter in your packet that speaks to this, but East Green Acres was built out a long time ago to provide irrigation water to farms, and they're actually seeing keeping up with demand is an easy thing for them to do. As we're building, as areas have annexed into the city and developed, East Green Acres actually sees a decrease in peak irrigation demand or peak demand because of not putting so much water onto a field as they maybe did historically. So they project if development continues within their district that they'll easily keep up with demand because that demand will actually decrease as time goes on. To kind of highlight that issue, their peak water demand this year was in late July, not in early July when we had that 4th of July heat wave. And that reflects more of the irrigation for ag production, which is still a major part of their operation. The city I know the most about is obviously ours. We operated at 71% of our peak capacity during that heat wave. That was a pretty comfortable place for us to be operating. And part of why we were comfortable is we've just recently completed construction on 2 additional wells. And we do have plans to build another additional well next year on the west side of town. That's in the proposed budget for next year. Of note, we have a water conservation ordinance that actually prohibits watering from noon to 6, noon to 6 in the evening. And that was put in place, I think, in 2003. It's been there for a long time. We're think it's good stewardship of the water, but it also helps keep the demand, that peak demand, low, which is what we have to build our system to. The lower we keep the peak demand, the less investment we have, and it actually reduces water rates in the long run because we're not installing infrastructure to just get used 3 days out of the year. I said it would be quick. I have one more thing. We hear a lot about the aquifer, and IDWR tracks aquifer levels over time. This is a quick screenshot. You can't see the numbers, obviously, but this goes back to about 1980. And really what it's showing is the aquifer level fluctuates over time. It's been higher than it is today. It's been lower than it is today. Our aquifer is an interesting one where it is recharged on a decade or less basis, mostly from surface water that infiltrates into the ground, as opposed to a confined aquifer like we have in the Moscow Pullman area, and that gets recharged, people don't know when, because it takes decades or centuries to recharge that. So the point is our aquifer depends a lot more on surface flow than it does on having a bank of water in the ground that's getting pulled from and depleted over time. So it is something that's kept a close eye on. Like I said, Idaho Department of Water Resources monitors this. They have a lot of data points throughout Post Falls and the rest of the aquifer. And what's not being seen is a downward trend in that aquifer. So I think that should be stated. Any questions?
Thanks, John. I think a couple interesting notes. Number one, you mentioned it, but East Green Acres pumps less water to residential than they did to agricultural. Number two, the water conservation ordinance in the city of Post Falls was installed when Clay was mayor, and that was back in, again, 2000.
I think it's 2003.
Number three, and this is going to date me, but I remember when I was a kid in Coeur d'Alene, that's 60 years ago, and during the summer, they asked people to water even, addresses water on even days, odd addresses to water on odd days. So it's nothing new. I think, as you said, it's a good stewardship, good precaution. If everybody's watering at the same time, your water pressure is going to go down. Doesn't mean you don't have enough water, it's just that everyone's using it at the same time. So I think there's some misconceptions out there, so I think this is very good information. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Mayor and council comments. I think I've made mine, and I use the term idiot, which maybe a mayor shouldn't, but I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of patience with anyone who would want to hurt a child, so if I offended anybody, I'm sorry. But if the perpetrator heard it, it was meant for you. And with that, council comments. Al?
Go ahead, Linda.
Linda?
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. I think that's Stephanie running that. I had the wonderful experience of being invited to volunteer at the triathlon this past Sunday. And I would like to first thank Hank Greer from Hayden. He was there. Eileen, our new prosecutor, and I were tasked to give out the medals. And Mr. Greer had his wife running in her first triathlon. She was training to do an Ironman. So he stood up by us and took all these pictures, and they're just fabulous. And he sent them to me, and I forwarded them on to Stephanie. Anyway, I just want to thank Tracy and Tracy Stevenson and her crew. They just did a phenomenal job there, and the feeling that you get when an athlete is pushing their child through the finish line there on a cart because they are disabled or couldn't run themselves, it just about pushes you to tears. The love that is shown there is just extraordinary. And I just want to thank the rec department very much for inviting me and to tell everyone it's a great event and it's going to be even more wonderful next year. So I was just so excited, and it's a great event. So thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Al?
Thanks, Linda. That's good stuff. I was down there too. It was fun. The thing I want to mention, and I really appreciate the presentations by staff tonight to clarify a lot of this misinformation that's in our community. I actually consider it a plague. My wife brought me to the attention of social media, primarily the Nextdoor app, because of misinformation that was on there. So I've been monitoring it and engaging with folks for probably about a year now. And it's just gotten to the point where it's driving me a little nuts, because over and over again, we get somebody who states something as a fact, which is not a fact, and then people jump all over that and want to know why we on the city council won't do something about it, or we're all on the take, or something like this. So I've tried to make it my mission, I guess, to get on there and say, hey, this isn't true, check your sources, whatever the case might be. I want to make a point about the fact that there's a difference between journalism and an opinion. Now, the newspaper or a news article on TV or wherever generally collects the facts and presents the facts. Somebody who just writes an article, whether it's a My Turn or a letter to the editor, that's just their opinion. And recently, just in the last week or so, we once again had another one of those where the guy on My Turn talked about the fact that we don't pay any attention to Boulder City, Nevada, that we should pay attention so we could control our growth. And I'd be happy to send this to anybody. This is a report I gave in April. The Boulder City, Nevada is completely different than Post Falls. And to draw any comparison between the two is absolutely, well, it's a little bit off. But once again, we do that. My point tonight is this. One, if you don't have your information straight, if it's an opinion, state it as an opinion, not as a fact. I would appreciate that. Two, if you read something like this, check some other sources. If you read something in the paper that you don't agree with, check another source. Even if it's journalism, check another source. That's all I'm asking people to do. This misinformation, the whole conflict of interest, crime in apartments, traffic, it's tearing this community apart. That's all I got.
Anybody else? Thank you. And we do not need an executive session tonight.
Do not.
Next motion is?
Adjourn.
Turn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.